Welcome. Tonight, we drift into the golden world of Versailles, a place where mirrors reflected chandeliers, where fountains danced in formal gardens, and where everything seemed poised, perfect, and aglow with power. But tonight's story does not belong to the kings or queens. It belongs to those who swept the floors, folded the linens, fetched the slippers, and watched from the shadows. The servants of Versailles were the quiet machinery behind the spectacle, moving through corridors with measured steps and bowed heads. This journey will take you behind the gilt walls, beneath the silk gowns, and beyond the grand performances. We will begin with the quiet labor of invisible hands. We will trace the fall of a queen whose name became legend. We will descend beneath Paris into its hollow veins. And we will conclude in the perfumed political world of a courtier surviving near the blazing center of power. Close your eyes, settle in, and let the distant murmur of rustling silk and echoing footfalls lull you into a different century. Now imagine you are a lady in waiting, a position attained by the highest-ranking female servants. Your life is a bit easier than the other servants, but you still wake before sunrise, spend all day doing menial tasks, and are expected to live entirely for the queen. One thing you know will never change is the smell of burnt sugar. Every morning you pass the royal pastry kitchen on your way to the queen's rooms, and every morning you breathe it in deeply. To ignore the aroma is a punishable offense. To ask about it, an extravagance. It is the smell of luxury, of indulgence, of infinite excess. The smell of the Sun King. You know the king well. He is not a stranger. He visits the queen in her chambers at least once a day, and sometimes he brings his mistresses. Cannot look away when the king enters a room. All eyes must follow him. If he glances your way, you must curtsy deeply and look down. To remain standing is insolent. To avert your gaze is treasonous. The queen is in the bath. She has asked for you specifically. She does not need help bathing, but she likes the company. The water steams, filling the room with heat. The queen sits in the center of it all, swathed in pearls and gold, and you sit upon a nearby stool, keeping watch. She is silent. Her mind is elsewhere. See the flicker of annoyance cross her face when her perfumer arrives late. You watch as she listens, her head cocked to the side as the perfumer sprays various scents about the room. You recognize the notes of rose and violet and orange blossom. You know the queen favors the last. But there is something new here, something sharp and masculine that did not belong. Just as quickly as it appeared, the perfumer was gone. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the room plunged in darkness. The queen was alone. Alone with her thoughts, alone with the scent of betrayal, alone in the vastness of her gilded cage. The king had been visiting Madame de Montespan, one of his many mistresses, a woman young enough to be his daughter. The queen knew this, of course. The king made no effort to hide his infidelities, but she also knew that nothing would change. She was the mother of the future heir. She was the most powerful woman in France. And besides, she liked her life at Versailles. No other woman could wear that particular shade of blue. No other woman could walk those particular gardens at that particular time. No other woman could put the king in his place quite like she could. In the candlelight, the queen becomes a queen. In the darkness, she is just a woman. She dips her head into her hands, fighting back tears. 1667 was not supposed to be her year. It was the year she entered the French court, barely 18 years old. A young girl with dreams of a real love story, a real family. Instead, she found herself alone in a gilded cage, surrounded by sycophants and spies. Everyone wanted something from her. King, her father, the court. And she had learned the hard way that she was not loved by any of them. Not even God, who had given her a heart, had failed to protect her. The queen rises from the bath. You stand and help her dry her skin. Her hands are steady. Her voice is controlled. She is the most perfect porcelain doll, but inside you know there is fire. The queen watches you curiously. She knows you've heard rumors. Who doesn't at this point? There are too many ears in the palace, too many mouths. She sees the pity on your face. She sees the questions in your eyes. You know how it feels to be a prisoner. You see the guards exchange uneasy glances as they walk past each other in the hallways. You see them tense whenever the queen enters a room. You see their faces tighten when the king approaches. For you, Duty means discretion. You know better than to ask questions. You know better than to offer condolences. You know better than to feel sorry for her. After all, what business is it of yours? You are a cog in a machine, nothing more. You do not think of yourself, only of the king and the queen. You are invisible. And yet they must be reminded of your presence constantly. The king is leaving for the hunt. He pauses in the queen's doorway, demanding to know why she is not present. Surely it's her duty to accompany him. It is tradition, isn't it? Duty, tradition, etiquette. They demand so much of her. They ask nothing of him. The queen is not expected to hunt, to attend the theater, to socialize. She is expected to bear children, to stay out of the king's way. And if she tires of that, they have built her a prison within a palace. The king turns away, leaving the queen standing in the doorway. Her face is pale, her eyes dark. You know better than to ask her if she is all right. You know better than to touch her arm, than to lead her back to her chambers. For now, she belongs to no one but herself. You take your leave, closing the door gently behind you. Outside, the world of Versailles beckons. The king is hunting, the courtiers gossiping, the nobles vying for power. But in this place, the only power anyone possesses belongs to the Queen of France, the Queen of Spain, the most powerful woman in Europe. But in here, she is just a woman. What would happen if people knew the truth? What would happen if they knew she wasn't happy? The answer is nothing. They would not care. They would not want to know. They would not dare ask. Because here, the price of admission is silence. Here, no one is allowed to be weak. Here, no one is allowed to show emotion. The walls of Versailles are deaf to sorrow. The manicured gardens blind to tears. And then you hear the news. The king is coming home early from the hunt. You prepare the queen's chambers once again, lighting the candles, fluffing the cushions, ensuring everything is in its place. You straighten the skirts of her gown, arrange the lace at her throat, smooth the wrinkles from her arms. She knows you won't stop staring at her, so she shows you her arms. They are bare, white, flawless, save for the small cuts and scrapes from where she clawed at the stone. How beautiful she is. How fragile. How sad. In a flash of inspiration, you pick up the perfumer's bottle and spray the air between you. The scent of orange blossom. She smiles. And for the first time since you've known her, you truly see the queen. She needs this. The pretense. The facade. The absolute certainty that she is the most envied woman in France. You are the keeper of that secret. The protector of her fragile ego. When the king enters, she straightens her spine and looks up. She sees the adoration in his eyes, hears the praise on his lips. She basks in the glow of his attention. Everything is as it should be. The king is hers. France is his. Versailles is their prison. You have done your job for another day. Another victory for the Sun King. Another defeat for the porcelain doll. In the heart of France, in the shadow of Versailles, a young man runs through the forest. His breaths are ragged, his steps uneven, his eyes wide with fear. Behind him, the shouts of guards echo through the trees. Ahead, the tall gates of St. Cloud Palace come into view. This is his last chance. He must make it through the gates, or he will be caught. Pushing open the heavy doors, he stumbles out onto the cobblestone path, gasping for breath. Noble stands before him, his face etched with disapproval. What is the meaning of this intrusion, he demands? The young man, unable to speak, can only shake his head, his eyes pleading for understanding. The noble, recognizing the urgency in his gesture, steps aside, allowing him to pass. Inside the palace, the young man finds refuge, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Here, within these four walls, he believes he is safe. Little does he know that the net of intrigue and betrayal stretches far beyond the confines of the palace grounds. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe for more historical tales. She arrived in France at the age of 14, an Austrian archduchess turned French dauphine. She had been chosen to marry the future king, to bear his children and ensure the continuation of the French monarchy. Her name was Marie Antoinette, and her new world was one of powdered hair, stiff gowns, and endless surveillance. She smiled dutifully, danced gracefully, but she was never truly accepted. Her foreignness lingered. The French court watched her every move, ready to scold, to whisper, to judge. A half-century before the storming of the Bastille, when Marie Antoinette's head would end up decorating the Place de la Concorde, there was another place that was the true seat of power in Paris. Beneath the city of lights, beneath the grand avenues and bustling shops, beneath the elegant drawing rooms and secret gardens, hidden away in the labyrinth beneath the streets of Paris, lies the Paris Catacombs, an underground tunneling maze of bones. Here, deep beneath the bustling city, are the remains of more than 6 million people. It is a silent city of the dead, a subterranean labyrinth that stretches over 200 miles. And here we find our first clue to understanding Marie Antoinette's world. Her new world was one of powdered hair, stiff gowns, and endless surveillance. When Marie Antoinette arrived in Paris in 1774, the future Queen of France was just a teenager. The city, with its narrow streets and dim oil lamp lighting, smelled of stale waste and chamber pots. The air was thick with disease and death. It was right down in the depths, amidst the stench and darkness, that some of the most important events of the French Revolution would begin to unfold. Because beneath the cobblestones of Paris, amongst the bones of the dead, plots were hatched and ideas were exchanged. It was a place where men could speak their minds without being overheard. For the people of Paris, this subterranean realm became known as the Labyrinth, a twisting mass of tunnels and chambers that became a metaphor for the city itself. Much like the labyrinth, Paris was a city of many faces. The bustling shops and elegant theaters hid a darker side. Poverty, disease, and unrest simmered beneath the surface, and when Marie Antoinette arrived in the Dauphine, she was both part of the problem and the solution. The young princess had been chosen to marry the future king, Louis XVI, to bear his children and ensure the continuation of the French monarchy. But she was also a foreigner, an outsider, who represented the extravagance and excess of the French royal court. Too many Parisians, she embodied everything that was wrong with the monarchy, and yet she was also the key to its survival. If she produced a healthy heir, then perhaps the people would accept her and their new king. For 3 years, Marie Antoinette lived in relative peace in the Palace of Versailles, far from the poverty and unrest of Paris. But as the queen, she would soon find brief refuge in Trianon, a smaller palace nestled away from Versailles, where she could surround herself with her trusted friends. There she could play at rural life, chopping wood, milking cows, and tending to her garden. There she laughed more freely, though outside the walls, resentment grew. As the queen, she would soon find brief refuge in Trianon, a smaller palace nestled away from Versailles, where she could surround herself with her trusted friends. There she could play at rural life, chopping wood, milking cows, and tending to her garden. There she laughed more freely, yet outside the walls, resentment grew. The bread prices soared. The people suffered, and they looked toward Versailles, where jewels glinted and silk rustled, with growing rage. In the heart of Paris, the rumors began to spread. They spoke of a hidden Paris, a city of secrets and whispers. It was a place where nobles plotted against the king, where commoners planned their revenge, and where the whispers of revolution first took flight. As if sensing the danger around her, Marie Antoinette retreated further into her own world. Then came the scandal of the diamond necklace. Though she was likely innocent, the damage was done. The queen was seen as frivolous, detached, even cruel. The people called her Madame Deficit. It was during these dark days that the future Queen Marie Antoinette began to spend more time in Trianon. Away from the gilded cages of Versailles, the queen found a measure of freedom. In the palaces of Trianon, she discovered a small and intimate world where she could escape the prying eyes and judgmental whispers of the court. Surrounded by her closest friends, the future Queen Marie Antoinette found solace in the simple pleasures of life: gardening, reading, and enjoying the company of those she loved. She created an idyllic world for herself, a world that was far removed from the intrigues and scandals of the French court. Yet even in this sanctuary, the whispers of discontent could not be ignored. The people of Paris were suffering, and the queen, whether she knew it or not, had become a symbol of their discontent. The whispers grew louder, the discontent became anger, and the anger soon erupted into violence. As the revolution gained momentum, Marie Antoinette's life in Trianon became increasingly precarious. She knew that she was living on borrowed time, and that sooner or later she would have to face the music. Yet despite the danger that lurked around every corner, she refused to flee. She was determined to stay in France and fight for the monarchy, even if it meant risking her own life. Amidst the chaos and upheaval, Marie Antoinette made a fateful decision. She would accompany her husband, King Louis XVI, into exile in the countryside. But as they fled the wrath of the Parisian mob, they were caught, and so began the final act of the tragedy. In the Tuileries Palace, the royal family huddled together, trying to come up with a plan to escape the city. But as the mob grew larger and more menacing, it became clear that there was no way out. They were trapped like rats in a gilded cage. The king and queen, along with their 2 children, escaped to the countryside, hoping to raise an army and reclaim the throne. But they were betrayed and returned to Paris in disguise, only to be imprisoned in the Temple. While the Parisians prepared to celebrate the anniversary of the storming of the Bastille, the royal family was held captive in the Temple, a grim reminder of the revolution's goals. Inside the prison, the once powerful royals were reduced to shadows of their former selves. Louis XVI, once the embodiment of French royalty, was now a broken man, haunted by the knowledge of his lost power. Marie Antoinette, once the epitome of elegance and grace, was reduced to a shell of her former self, her spirit crushed by the weight of her situation. When the news of the fall of the monarchy reached them, they knew that their fate was sealed. They were no longer just prisoners, they were political pawns in a game they no longer understood. The revolution had taken control of their lives, and there was no turning back. One by one, their children were taken from them, leaving them alone in the darkness of their prison cell. With each passing day, the threat of execution loomed over them, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. As the weeks turned into months, the royal family's hope began to dwindle. Their captors, eager to make an example of them, paraded them through the streets of Paris. Gawking crowds jeered and spat at them, their words like daggers piercing the royals' already wounded hearts. Finally, the day came when the family was led to the guillotine, their heads held high, their voices strong, as if in a final act of defiance against their captors. But beneath the surface, fear and sadness ran rampant. They were not just ending the monarchy, they were ending a way of life. But as the blade fell and the screams subsided, a sense of relief washed over the crowd. The revolution was complete, and the old order was gone forever. After Marie Antoinette's execution, silence followed. But slowly, over the decades, her image softened from villain to victim. The queen was seen as a tragic woman caught in the machinery of history, a pawn in the game of power and privilege. And as the memory of her execution faded, a new story emerged. Marie Antoinette, the girl who had arrived in France as a reluctant bride, became the tragic woman whose severed head inspired both fear and pity. And in the hearts and minds of the people, her story continued to live on, a reminder of a time when the mighty had fallen and the people had triumphed. Now we descend from the guillotine's shadow and move even deeper beneath the surface of Paris itself into its winding, hidden underworld. The rooster crows. You awake, stretch, yawn, and bend over your chamber pot. What a night you had last evening, dancing with Duke Gaston at the Sun King's party. Oh, how your feet hurt. Your velvet slippers have never seemed so far from your face. You shuffle into your dressing room and prepare for the day. Soon you are ready. You straighten the lace on your linen collar, adjust your girdle, pull on your silk stockings, and don your finest gown. With that, you are ready for another day at the palace. You step out of your apartment and enter the bustling hallway. Footmen pass with trays of coffee. Nanny's push carriage is filled with sleeping children. Lords and ladies gossip in low voices. You exchange greetings and small talk, mindful of your posture and appearance. Everyone here seems so carefree, but you know better. The Sun King is watching. His eyes are everywhere. There is a knock. Your lady-in-waiting enters and curtsies. Your Majesty, she says, the Queen requests your presence in the solar. You straighten your skirt and follow her down the hall. Outside, you see her standing by the window, backlit and silhouetted against the morning light. She turns, and you kneel before her. Rise, she says, and you rise slowly. Hey, tell me, did you enjoy the festivities last night? As much as one can, Your Majesty. Good. You must be sure to please the king. He takes great pride in your needlework. I will endeavor to do my best. you answer, looking up at her, a silent question forming on your lips. She shakes her head slightly. The king is in no mood for pleasantries this morning. He has had a disagreement with the Cardinal Mazarin, and his counselors are divided. This could go badly. The queen looks away from you toward the door. See that you join the other ladies in the royal sitting room. I believe the king will wish to speak with you today. Of course, your majesty, you answer, and you curtsy low before backing out of the room. You hurry to the sitting room and take a seat. You chat quietly with the other ladies, trying to appear natural. Soon, the king enters, and you sit rigidly upright. He motions for you to come closer. What is he doing? He's pulling out a handkerchief and dabbing at his eyes. You rush to his side and ask what is wrong. He waves you away, but you persist until he relents. He explains that his counselor has angered him with news from Spain. It is true that France and Spain are allied, but this alliance is little more than a sham. Each kingdom schemes against the other, and there have been border incursions. The king wants to send troops to aid the Spanish king, and Mazarin opposes him. You must convince him, the king says, dabbing at his eyes again. He is your uncle, after all. But sire, you say, how can I influence the cardinal? Speak to him of my honor. Remind him of our family's glory. Then he rises abruptly. I believe I shall speak with him myself. Come, we ride to Versailles today. Curtsy and follow him out of the room. Soon, you and the king are riding toward Versailles, passing through the forest of Fontainebleau. The trees seem to press in around you, their branches reaching toward the sky. The king speaks. I fear Mazarin has betrayed me. You say nothing, but squeeze his arm reassuringly. When you reach the palace, you dismount and walk inside. You watch as the king confronts his minister, both men shouting. Mazarin argues with raised hands, but the king will have none of it. He storms off, leaving the cardinal sputtering. You find the king alone in a room, staring out the window. He is calmer now, but troubled. He thanks you for coming. You have steadied me, he says. But what shall I do? You say, sire. Perhaps you should let the matter rest. All will be well. He nods slowly and smiles faintly. You are right, as always, my dear. Come, let us dine. Versailles is a place of constant activity, of servants scurrying about, nobles arriving and departing, and royalty making endless decisions. It can be exhausting. Sometimes the courtiers escape to the gardens and stroll among the fountains and statues. Other times they gather in the courtyards and watch the acrobats perform. They play games and laugh, or they argue politics with fellow nobles, and always there is intrigue. Someone sneers behind your back. Another whispers in your ear. A third plots against you in the next apartment. For a moment you forget the tension and turn to watch a group of actors perform. Perhaps tomorrow you will take part in the play yourself. Ah, yes. You were to deliver a message to the Duchess of Burgundy. Find her. You excuse yourself from the crowd and hurry to the royal apartments. She will be there receiving guests. You knock and enter. You stand in the doorway and wait. There is no time to lose. You must deliver the message and be gone before anyone notices your absence. The Duchess looks up from her embroidery and smiles warmly at you. You smile back, then explain the king's message. The Duchess listens politely, but you can tell she is bored. She waves her hand dismissively and you leave. Quickly you race to the royal sitting room, where the king sits watching the other courtiers play games. You kneel before him. Sire, you say, you wanted me? He glances down at you and frowns. Did you speak with the Duchess? Yes, sire. He sighs. Very well, thank you. You rise and curtsy. Then you step back as a noble approaches the king, eager to engage in a game of chess. You slip out of the room and down the hall. It is going to be a long day. You are exhausted. So much activity and intrigue. Will the king ever notice you? Would he ever bestow an honor upon you? These thoughts drift through your mind as you return to your chambers. You have attended the king for many years. You have watched him grow from a boy into a man. And still, he does not trust you completely. You sigh and sink into a chair. Maybe someday soon he will recognize your worth. For now you must rest. Tomorrow will bring new intrigues, new rivalries, and new opportunities. You must be ready. You lay down, close your eyes, and dream of grandeur. After all these years, you still hope to catch the eye of the Sun King. But who will catch yours? Click here to learn more about the Sun King's lavish court, or click here to explore the dark and mysterious catacombs beneath Paris. Why are you still here? Choose wisely, because you only get one life, but you might just have a second chance. That's right. Thanks to a generous grant from a museum, we are able to offer a second chance at education to those who want to learn more about the history of Paris. Through our educational outreach program, we have launched free educational tours, lectures, and workshops. Our tours are offered in English and French and delve into the history of Paris and its iconic landmarks. During the summer months, we even offer evening tours by candlelight. To learn more, visit our website. Don't wait. The second chance lasts only until the end of the year. The sun rises, and with it, the Sun King, Louis XIV. The most powerful man in Europe begins his day like any other, with the levee. A public ceremony in which he awakens, dresses, and prepares for a rule in full view of carefully chosen nobles. You are a courtier, and your day begins long before the king's, because the real ceremony is getting yourself ready to be seen. You rise early, dressed immaculately. Your goal is not to work, but to be seen, to be near power, to whisper at the right moment, to flatter with just enough elegance. You dress not in comfort or modesty, but in layers upon layers of meaning. Ruffled collars, shimmering silks, jeweled waistcoats. Each button, each fold, each loop is designed to display wealth, taste, and devotion to the crown. You might own these fine clothes, but they have become a symbol of royal generosity. You are a walking advertisement of the Sun King's largesse. As a courtier, your morning is spent traveling to the palace, maneuvering through crowds, greeting acquaintances with exaggerated politeness, and searching for a place to observe the levee from discreetly. You are not here to serve or assist. You are here to be a witness to power. The king needs no help dressing. He is a master of the elaborate ritual. While servants bustle about him, you stand stiffly as the king takes his viceroy's throne. The velvet curtains part, and the Sun King appears. Louis XIV, despite his advanced age, moves with the grace of a dancer. His wigs are perfectly curled. His silk stockings fit flawlessly. His every gesture is designed to project vitality. He is not merely the most powerful man in Europe. He is a godlike figure who rules through divine right. The sight of him so impossibly put together invigorates you. You straighten your back, fluff your own wig, and prepare to face the day. Your first task? Attend the king at meals. The dining room is large, perhaps big enough to seat 20 people if necessary. But today there are only two of you and the Sun King. Etiquette demands dozens of courses, each presented on gold and crystal, and each announced by a herald. Despite the abundance of food, you eat sparingly. Only the king may eat in silence. You must demonstrate appetite without gluttony, interest without inquisitiveness. If you spill a drop of wine, an accident, a stain, a slur against your hostess, if you pick at a dish too much, you insult the chef. If you speak too little, you do not show proper respect. You glance up at the king often, but never too often. You smile at him occasionally, but never too broadly. You listen intently, while others speak to him, but never interrupt. The meal is an exercise in futility, a ballet of feigned interest performed for the amusement of a king. And now comes the promenade, a ceremonial walk through the meticulously manicured gardens. There are strict rules of conduct, even here. You walk close enough to the king to stay within earshot, but not so close as to block his path. You keep your chin slightly tilted upward, looking off into the distance, always with a hint of smile playing on your lips. The ground beneath your feet has been leveled and smoothed for this very walk. Every tree, bush, and flower bed has been placed to frame vistas of rolling hills or trickling fountains. The air is filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Birds tweet merrily from hidden perches. It is a perfect world, ordered and beautiful. You stroll along, matching the king's pace, keeping your head high, your shoulders back. You do not walk with purpose or energy. You do not reveal sweat or fatigue. You simply exist in this perfect world, savoring the beauty, living in the moment. What did the king say? Did he mention your name? Was that a new appointment? You glance at your companions. What did they make of it? You wonder how many paces you took, how many words were spoken, what secrets passed between the king and your rival. Do they know something you don't? Do they have some advantage? This walk is not about exercise or relaxation. It is a demonstration of control and obedience. The king controls the garden. the weather, the very seasons. You control your heart rate, your breathing, your emotions. You are always composed, always in control, never revealing the anxiety that festers beneath your skin. Now comes the game, the hours you spend playing cards or dominoes with the king and other courtiers. The stakes are low, the gamesmanship is high. You watch the king closely, noting his moods, his mannerisms, his habits. Even in a game, he follows strict etiquette, never touching the pile of money, keeping his hands on the table, moving pieces with deliberate slowness. You strive to match his movements, his speech, his very thoughts. When you win, you do so modestly. When you lose, you accept it gracefully. You do not gloat or whine. You simply play on, enduring losses, biding your time, waiting for your chance to triumph. Hours pass quickly in Versailles. Before you know it, it is time for lunch. Again, there are strict rules of conduct to follow. You must arrive precisely on time, not a moment early or late. You must bow exactly when the king enters the dining room. You must sit in your assigned chair and eat the precise amount. You must speak only when addressed by the king. You must eat nothing faster or slower than the king. If you finish first, you remain silent until he does the same. In the middle of the meal, you must rise with the king when certain dishes are brought forth. You must also rise when ladies enter the room or leave it. Ladies are allowed in the king's dining room only on special occasions. They enter silently, glide to their seats, and exit silently, never speaking a word. Their presence is a distraction, yet the king allows them because their presence enhances his status. Keep your eyes downcast when they enter, and raise them slowly when the ladies have left. You do not stare, but you do not avert your gaze either. You remain seated when the king excuses himself for a siesta. You do not talk loudly. You do not laugh boisterously. You do not reach for more food. You are a backdrop for the king, a silent film playing out his greatness. When the king leaves, the courtiers begin whispering, "Who is that lady? Was that a new appointment? Why did the king favor him over me?" The afternoon is a blur of music and theater. There are concerts, operas, and ballets, all designed to entertain the king and elevate your spirits.
Oh, yeah.
You applaud politely, laugh at designated moments, and show appreciation for the artists. Once more, you are not here for your own enjoyment. You are here to please the king. You return to the gardens later in the day, perhaps to watch a fountain display or a fireworks show. You stand patiently, shoulder to shoulder with the other courtiers, watching the water dance or the sky blaze with color. You do not push, shove, or elbow others to get a better view. You do not point or gasp or laugh. You simply stand, experiencing the spectacle with the rest of the crowd. Finally, it is time for dinner. This meal is less formal than the midday one, but the rules are still strict. You may not leave the king's side. You may not eat too much or too little. You may not speak too loudly or too softly. You must be attentive, polite, and unobtrusive. The night ends with a masquerade, a grand ball where courtiers wear masks and dance in elaborate costumes. You choose your mask carefully, knowing that it will become a part of your identity for the evening. You move through the crowd, bowing and swirling, never taking a seat unless invited. You do not stumble, trip, or fall. You do not reveal your identity, nor do you seek to learn the identities of others. You are here to dance, to flirt, and to disappear by midnight. Evening is done. The Sun King has retired. You lingered by the gates, watching the torchlight flicker and fade. Another day has passed, another chance for advancement squandered. You wonder if the king noticed you today, if he heard your clever remark, or saw your flawless step. Perhaps tomorrow you will be called forward. Perhaps your name will be on a list. You tighten your grip on your empty purse. You need a new hat. You need to buy fabric for your wife. You need to pay your tailor. And then, just possibly, you could afford to replace those worn shoes. But those are tomorrow's worries. Tonight you rehearse your bows. You adjust your wig, and you practice the delicate art of surviving another day at Versailles. Every day is the same at Versailles, and yet every day is different. For the tiniest mistake can ruin your reputation. For the king's mood can change your fortunes. For a misplaced word can end your career. For a well-timed compliment can open doors. You live in a world of endless potential of what-ifs and maybes. You learn to read the king's face, to decipher his glances, to understand his silences. You learn to endure, to wait, to hope. For the king's favor is fickle, but the sun never sets on Versailles. And as long as it shines, there is always another chance to catch his eye. The palace of Versailles was a glittering trap. For servants, it was a place of exhaustion. For queens, of scrutiny. For courtiers, of tension disguised as luxury. Yet within its walls were moments of quiet, footsteps in long corridors, a candle flickering beside embroidered drapes, the sound of a broom on polished floors. As you settle now into your own quiet space, perhaps far from palaces, in powdered wigs, you may find comfort in the rhythm of ordinary life, a life not lived in performance, but in rest. Good night. Welcome. Tonight we step away from the thunder of hooves and the clash of swords so often associated with the Viking Age. There will be no roaring berserkers, no raids on English monasteries. Instead, I invite you into the quiet crevices of Viking society, the places history often overlooks, where life moved slowly, silently, and sometimes painfully beneath the polished axes and carved longships. The story of the Norse people is often told through heroes and warlords. But not everyone who lived in the shadow of Odin held a sword. Most did not. Some held looms, some carried firewood, some were shackled in silence, laboring without reward or recognition, so breathe slowly. Let the noise of modern life fall away. Settle into the long twilight of the north, where winters stretch on, and silence is often louder than speech. Let us begin our journey with the most forgotten members of Viking society, the thralls. What's a saga? Our telling. Sagas are stories of adventure. Heroes like Ragnar Lothbrok, hacking and slashing their way through Denmark or Iceland, winning treasure and glory for all their kin. Plenty of those stories get told in this series. But sagas aren't just about warriors. They're about family sagas. Family histories were an important thing to Icelanders, so that's how they understood themselves as people. As part of a line stretching back into the mists of prehistory and reaching forward 2 generations yet to come. Because for the Icelanders, saga wasn't just a story. It was a history and a prophecy. Each generation had its own saga, and each saga was an opportunity to shape their people's future, which is why every good Icelandic family had a professional storyteller or sagasagor. A saga singer would know his family's story backwards and forwards. He'd recite it during the long winter nights, so everyone would know where they came from and be reminded of their obligations to the family. It was up to them to uphold the family's honor and continue its saga. But you don't have to be related to someone famous to have a saga. Even a simple farmer in northern England or a humble monk in France can find their story written down. Because if you were alive back then, you were living in the middle of a saga. As the Vikings were sailing around and pillaging through Europe, the whole continent was caught up in their saga. Kings and dukes, peasants and priests, some of them were writing their own stories down, and every person had a role to play. And today, we're going to meet one of the most famous saga songers, Egil Skallagrimsson. Egbert was born around 860 AD in a village called Skagafjell in northern Iceland. Back then, Iceland was a volcanic island full of farmers and a whole lot of sheep. Most of the land was owned by big chieftains who had come over from Norway. To lead their people, these chieftains ruled the countryside from their farms. But to do things like collect taxes or organize defenses against outside threats, they needed to hold meetings. So every 3 years, all the chieftains would gather together at a spot called Pingler, which means fields of law. There, in an open field surrounded by mountains, they would hold the Althing, or General Assembly, and make laws that applied to everyone on the island. Egil's father, Snorri, was one of the chieftains, and he wanted his son to be the next chieftain after him. So, when Egil was young, his dad sent him to live with other nobles, probably to learn how to fight and lead men, and stuff like that. But not everyone wanted Egil to grow up to be a chieftain. Some people thought Snorri was abusing his power, and they wanted Snorri and all his sons to be gone. So while Egil was away at school, his dad and brothers came home to find a whole bunch of their sheep slaughtered. And they suspected that it was the same group of rebels who murdered Egil's uncle a few years before, so Snorri decided to leave Iceland and get revenge. He took Egil's older brother with him, but he couldn't bring Egil because he was too young to leave his studies. But maybe he wasn't too young to take action, because instead of going to help his dad, Egil got revenge for the sheep by himself. He gathered some friends and went out looking for whoever killed his sheep and robbed their farm killed their cattle, and stole their stuff. And then he did it again to someone else, and then someone else, until he had enough stuff to set sail for the British Isles and start a career as a Viking. And from here, Egil's life splits into two different sagas, the saga of his family and the saga of his country. His dad Snorri went to Ireland and fought with the dynasty for a while, but then he got tired of it and came home to Iceland, where he was eventually killed in a fight with another chieftain. And in the meantime, Egil became a famous Viking. He sailed all over, including to the Byzantine Empire, where he tried to sell his sword to Emperor Basil the Macedonian. But Basil didn't want Egil's sword, so Egil kicked off his sandal and offered him that instead. Legend says that Basil paid him handsomely for the shoe. And wearing that money around his neck, Egil went to Harun al-Rashid, the Caliph of Baghdad, and sold him a story instead. According to Egil, the Byzantines weren't worthy of his amazing sandal skills. So he joined Harun's army and went on campaigns in France. Meanwhile, Iceland was getting overrun by Norwegian settlers, and Egil decided to go home and see what was going on. As he rounded the southern tip of Iceland, he saw a huge fleet of longships anchored in a ford. He landed and made his way up the beach, just as a group of men were burying a chieftain named Geli. No one knew who the dead man was, Egil asked, and learned that he was an old friend of his dad's. So Egil went to his friend's farm and took over for his widow. And since he was a generous host, everyone invited him to the Althing. Now, at this point, Egil is basically the classic Viking. He's been around the world, he's got stories to tell, he's seen incredible things. But as soon as he steps foot at the Althing, he understands that he's in a different kind of hall. This isn't a place for drinking and fighting. This is a place for law, and this is serious business. When Egil took over his friend's farm, he didn't ask anyone for permission. And at the Althing, he was brought up on murder charges, because he may have killed the previous owner. And to defend himself, he called witnesses and judges to prove that he saved the farm by chasing away marauders and making sure that crops were planted. Basically, he helped the farm stay afloat. But his defense didn't work, and he was fined for full ship's worth of silver. And though he didn't have that much cash lying around, Egil was a poet, and he could pay his debt with poetry. So while his friends went out and pillaged to raise the money, Egil wrote 3 poems, the Suna Snorra, the Guthron of HVH, and the H. Virgiland S-Ways or Ways of the H. Virgiland Men. And since these poems sound suspiciously like a biography of his dad, the poem cycle was considered a saga, an inherited family story meant to inspire and instruct the next generation. And in it, Snorri comes off pretty damn perfect. It's the kind of guy who builds his own power base in Iceland, but also helps the poor and protects women. And with that reputation secured, Egil stayed in Iceland and became a local chieftain. He married twice, had 6 kids, kept a big farm, herded a whole bunch of sheep, and retired as a poet. It doesn't sound exactly epic, but in terms of sagas, it was pretty perfect. Want to learn more about Viking history? Check out our series in the description. And thanks to our supporters for making History Extra possible. You can support us too. We'll link to that in the description. In the Great Hall of the Fjord, where heroes are born and stories unfold, there lived a man named Egil. Egil, the Scalded, they called him, for his skin was as white as snow and his hair as red as a flame. But it was not just his looks that set him apart. No, Egil was a warrior, a slayer of men, and a poet, a weaver of words. Now you might think those two things don't go together, being a warrior and being a poet. It's like asking a shield to bear the weight of a sword. But Egil made it work. See, warriors back then, they didn't just fight. They also composed songs about their battles and their victories. It was their way of remembering who they were, what they had done. Egil, well, he took that to another level. You see, Egil, he wasn't just any guy. He came from a long line of warriors, men who were known throughout the land for their strength and their skill in battle. His father was a famous warrior, and his grandfather, well, he was a legendary hero. So when Egil grew up, it was no surprise that he became a warrior too, picked up a sword and a shield, and he learned how to fight. But while he was learning how to defend himself, he was also learning how to write poems. He would sit for hours on end, carving runes into wood, his mouth moving soundlessly as he shaped the words in his head. It wasn't easy. Poetry back then, it wasn't just about rhyming words. It was about memorizing long, complicated lines. It's about speaking them with the right intonation, about conveying the right emotions. But Egil, he took to it like a fish in water. He had a natural gift for it, and soon he was composing poems that were praised throughout the land. Now you might think that being a warrior and a poet is like trying to balance two swords on your fingertips. They're completely different things. But for Egil, they weren't. He didn't see them as separate either. For him, being a warrior and being a poet were two sides of the same coin. Both required skill, both required dedication, and both were a way of honoring the world around him. He fought in far-off lands, and when he returned home, he wrote about his adventures. He sang of the battles he had fought in, of the people he had met, of the places he had seen. In his words, they painted such vivid pictures that it was like the listeners were right there with him. Egil, the scalded, he roamed the fjords with his band of warriors, fighting, drinking, singing. He was a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure. But he was also a storyteller, a keeper of memories. He didn't just live his life, he recorded it in verse, and in doing so, he gave us a window into a world that is long gone. So if you ever find yourself in a great hall, and the fire is low, and the meat is strong, and the old man in the corner starts to sing, then listen to his song. For it may just be the tale of Egil, the scalded, the warrior poet, and his saga. The year is 1066. A vast fleet of longships sweeps across the North Sea, 3,000 men strong. They are led by a single, fierce woman, Queen Margaret of Denmark. Our ships have already ravaged the English coast. Now she stands ready to unleash hell on the town of York. She will sack and destroy it. And when its people regroup, she will face them again in battle, riding a horse with a hunting cloak flying behind her. And when she has one, she will ride through the streets of York on a captured warhorse. Holding high the English standard, having just ripped it down from atop the city's highest tower, few women in history have matched her ferocity. But what made Margaret so powerful? What allowed a woman in a man's world to raise an army and lead it to victory? How did she wield political power and bend kings to her will? In part it was about blood. She was the daughter of King Sweyn Forkbeard, who conquered England in 1042. Though he never styled himself King of England, preferring the title of King of the English, he ruled over a Viking dynasty that traced its roots back to the legendary semi-mythical warrior Ragnar Lothbrok. But Margaret's rise to power had less to do with bloodlines than with brains. As a child, she was sent to be raised at the court of the English king, where she learned the ways of the English nobility. She grew up speaking their language and knew how to navigate the intricacies of their customs and laws. And while her father was a brutal warrior, happy to burn and plunder, she understood the value of subtler arts, the importance of weaving alliances and wielding the law. Once, when a rival queen tried to poison her, Margaret escaped and took the throne by using the queen's own daughter as a witness. "I wanted to spare her life," Margaret said later, "and so I called her as a witness before God Almighty and all the saints, that if she had knowledge of the matter, she should say what she knew." The little girl confirmed the plot, and Margaret used the evidence to seize the throne. In other words, she played the game better than the others, which is not to say she didn't know how to fight. After she defeated a rebellion in northern England, she returned to the capital, having the ringleaders brought before her. Then she sentenced them, saying, "I shall never forgive you for this, nor shall any of my offspring ever forgive you." And yet, despite her ruthlessness, she was also deeply religious, building churches and monasteries. Founding the bishopric of Denmark and inviting English monks to come and help run it, her piety did not prevent her from ruling like a god over her subjects. When a rival Norwegian king threatened war, she simply crossed herself and said, "God damn him, let him come." She was not afraid to take up arms herself. During the battle with the English, she fought alongside her husband, King Tostig, who died in battle. Some accounts say that Margaret was so grief-stricken that she threw herself into his funeral pyre. In the Viking Age, women could own and manage property. They could also engage in long-distance trade, and were often partners in mercenary bands. But these were exceptions, outliers in a patriarchal world. Most Viking women were farmers, their lives tethered to the rhythms of the seasons. Their days filled with the tasks of managing a household, raising children, and caring for animals. While their male counterparts bragged about fighting prowess and daring raids, Most women boasted of their domestic skills, their ability to keep a house running smoothly, to feed and clothe their families, to welcome guests and entertain merchants. So the longhouse is warm now. The hearth blazes gently. Its flames do not roar. They breathe. The walls are timber, darkened with years of smoke. Along the benches sit the men and women of the household. The chieftain at the center. All eyes, even if lowered, watch him. Hey. To be a chieftain in Viking society was to perform power. Constantly. One did not simply rule. One hosted. And one listened. Meals were not simply food. They were rituals of loyalty. Bowls of broth passed hand to hand, slabs of smoked fish, wheels of cheese, fermented drink, passed in horn and wooden cup.
Ow.
Every gesture meant something. To offer someone the best cut was not kindness. It was politics. The hall was where alliances formed and where betrayal brewed. Every word carried weight, and silence even more. Women in these halls were not merely decoration. A chieftain's wife might oversee the household, mediate disputes, and carry influence through careful counsel. A single phrase from her, spoken at the right moment, could shift the direction of an entire winter. Storytelling was a communal art. Not loud, not boisterous, but rather measured, rhythmic. A saga told slowly, so every listener might drift into it, like mist curling along the fjords. And those who remembered it, repeated it. That is how memory survived. Evenings in the hall were not always peaceful. Fights could break out, feuds could flare. But most nights passed in low conversation, the sound of wood settling in the cold, the hum of distant winds outside. Power did not always need a blade. Sometimes it wore a woolen cloak and spoke in riddles. We'll just leave this fire here burning brightly as we step into the icy waters of Scandinavia's frozen north. Now imagine you're standing in a Viking longhouse. Outside, the wind screams its mournful song across the barren landscape. Inside, a fire crackles in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the faces around you. You've entered the world of Vikings, a society where honor, duty, and courage were everything. In this world, the chieftain ruled with a combination of force and generosity. His word was law, but he knew the value of making his guests feel welcome. Mead, a sweet honey-based drink, was often served to visitors as a symbol of hospitality. In return, guests were expected to bring gifts, usually in the form of goods or services. The exchange of gifts was not just a polite gesture, it was a way of building alliances and maintaining order. Refusing a gift was considered a grave insult, while accepting one too readily could make the recipient seem desperate. As the evening progresses, the mood shifts from merriment to seriousness. Now the men are seated on long benches, their eyes fixed on the chieftain. He is the leader, the embodiment of the values his society held dear. When he speaks, everyone listens intently. For Vikings, being a man meant more than just physical strength. It meant being respected by one's peers, being fierce in battle, and being generous with one's resources. Above all, it meant being a loyal member of the community. Betrayal was the worst offense a Viking man could commit. But what about women in Viking society? Are they nothing more than property, as some people believe? Well, that's not entirely true. Women had more rights and freedoms than their counterparts in many other cultures at the time. They could own property, make contracts, and even divorce their husbands if they so chose. However, their roles and opportunities still largely revolved around their domestic responsibilities. While men went off to raid and trade, women managed the household and provided crucial economic and social functions. Their skills in areas such as brewing, textile production, and animal husbandry were highly valued. Furthermore, women played a vital role in maintaining social order and continuity. Through their control over valuable resources like food and drink, they could exert considerable influence over their households. In a patriarchal society, Viking women demonstrated agency and leadership, shaping the dynamics of power within their communities. And what of those long, dark winter nights when the temperature dipped below freezing and the snow piled high outside the longhouse? What did people do for fun? Well, they told stories. They sang songs, and they recited poetry. They talked about their gods and their heroes and their adventures. They argued about politics and philosophy and the meaning of life. Some might think that Vikings were only interested in fighting and pillaging, but that's a narrow and inaccurate view. Vikings were complex human beings with a rich culture and a deep appreciation for the arts. Storytelling was an important part of their culture. The winters were long and the nights were dark, so people would gather around the fire and tell stories. They would tell stories about their gods and their heroes. They would also tell stories about their everyday lives. This was a way of preserving their culture and history. It was also a way of passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. In addition to storytelling, Vikings also enjoyed singing and playing instruments. They would sing songs about their gods and their heroes. They would also sing songs about their everyday lives. They played instruments such as the fiddle, the flute, and the harp. Overall, Vikings enjoyed a wide range of leisure activities. They were a culture that valued storytelling, music, and poetry. They were also a culture that appreciated the finer things in life, such as good food and drink and the company of friends. Now, as the fire in our own imaginary longhouse fades, let us conclude that Vikings were not just brutal fighters. They were also sophisticated and cultured people with a rich inner life. They valued the arts, music, and storytelling. And they understood the importance of community and family. So the next time you hear the word Viking, don't just think of blood and thunder. Think of the longhouse and all that went on within its walls. The Viking world was not what legend has made of it. Yes, there were warriors, there were ships, there was conquest, but there were also thralls, nameless hands in the dark. There were poets who mourned. There were burials thick with silence, and halls where power moved like smoke. As you settle into your own quiet night, consider how far we have come from those firelit rooms. How fortunate we are to rest freely, to own our sleep. Let the distant winds of the north fade. Let the sagas close. And let the hush of history carry you gently into rest. Welcome. Tonight, let us journey far from the noise of modern life, beyond time and place, to a realm veiled in silk and silence, the world of the mules. Their empire, vast, powerful, and artistically rich, was governed not just by swords and scrolls, but also by the quieter influence of lives hidden from view. As the lamps flicker low and the world around you dims, imagine walking along the marble corridors of a Mughal palace. The walls are cool to the touch. The air is heavy with rose water and sandalwood. Shadows ripple behind lattice screens. This is not the history you learned in textbooks. It is slower, softer, more human. We begin, as always, with daily life. The year is 1637, and the location is Agra, India. In the lap of luxury at the royal court of the Mughal Empire sits Jahanara Begum, the eldest daughter of Emperor Shah Jahan. Life has been kind to her. Her father doted on her. She had a loving mother, and she grew up in relative freedom compared to the women around her. She got along with her stepmother, Mumtaz Mahal, who was the emperor's chief wife, and she loved her brother Dara Shikoh, who was her father's heir. But recently, cracks have appeared in this perfect life. Her father was consumed with his new wife, the young and beautiful 17-year-old Aisha. Yes, Shah Jahan was capable of great love, but he was also selfish and possessive. He gave Aisha everything, jewels, palaces, and endless praise. And though he showered her with gifts too, he never gave her the one thing she wanted most: attention. Shah Jahan may have loved Aisha, but he wasn't about to make her his favorite. Not only was Jahanara his eldest child and his firstborn daughter, but she was intelligent, outspoken, and educated, which made her dangerous. One day Shah Jahan sent for Jahanara and told her he was sending her away to a palace in Lahore to be closer to his viceroy, her uncle, Shujat Khan. Behind this facade of familial affection lay a darker truth. By sending her away, Shah Jahan was banishing her from the heart of the empire and severing her ties to her brother, Dara, and the succession. So Jahanara did what any reasonable person would. She threw herself at her father's feet and wept. Bitterly at first, Shah Jahan was taken aback by her reaction. No one had ever dared to question his authority. But then he relented. His daughter would stay in Agra. However, there was a catch. She would live in the Zanana, the women's quarters, separate from the rest of the family. The very place where Shah Jahan had imprisoned his first wife, the woman who had borne him Jahanara and shaped the Mughal dynasty. Jahanara was incredulous. Why should she be sent to the women's quarters when she was not a wife or a concubine? She protested. But Shah Jahan was adamant. No. Soon Jahanara found herself inside the infamous Zanana. To her horror, she was not alone. There were dozens of women, royal wives, concubines, female relatives, children, attendants, tutors, and guards, sometimes hundreds of people living in the Zanana. Men other than the emperor and select eunuchs were forbidden. In fact, the entire complex was designed to exclude men. Male servants entered only to hand over offerings and gifts to the women before leaving immediately. If a male servant happened to linger too long, the eunuchs, whose job it was to guard the women, would punish them, sometimes severely. Jahanara's mother had died when she was very young, and she had no interest in becoming a wife or bearing children. Nevertheless, according to tradition, she could not move freely around the Zanana without being accompanied by a guard. Her days stretched endlessly before her, full of rituals and routine. She bathed twice a day in rose-scented water, prayed 5 times a day facing Mecca, Dod, and spent hours dressing in elaborate clothes. Each morning, servants brought trays laden with fruits, bowls of honeyed milk, and dried dates. Women of all ages moved through the courtyard, some sitting on ornate couches, while others strolled under colorful umbrellas. They exchanged greetings, commented on the weather, discussed poetry, and sometimes argued bitterly. Behind closed doors, however, the situation was far from idyllic. Once the gates of the Zanana were closed for the night, peace descended, but it was a deceptive calm. The women were not idle. They were waiting for the emperor to choose their company, waiting for a whisper of favor, waiting for the tides of rivalry to shift. Friendships could bloom here, but so too did resentment and suspicion. A glance, a perfume, a misplaced word could spark jealousy or curry favor. Love affairs were common and often resulted in tragedy. Once a woman caught her rival's eye, she was marked. Whispers followed her everywhere, ruining her reputation and future prospects. If she were lucky, her disgrace might be forgotten in time. But if not, she would be doomed to a life of loneliness, her only company, the mocking whispers of the envious. To survive in this atmosphere, the women turned to subtlety as their primary tool of influence. They sent letters, poems, and gifts, often with hidden meanings, to let their feelings be known. They knew how to read the subtlest of signs, a flower, a poem, an ornament. Anything could become a symbol in their game of seduction and manipulation. Instance, the red rose, associated with love and beauty, was used to express devotion to the emperor. Meanwhile, a white rose could signify a woman's loyalty to her husband, or perhaps her longing for a reunion. And then there was the lily, often linked to purity and innocence, but also used to convey a woman's faithfulness to her faith. The women also utilized the art of rhetoric to express themselves. They perfected the subtle art of oblique speech, where words concealed deeper meanings. This practice demanded finesse and intuition, as women communicated their emotions and intentions without causing offense or revealing too much. It required a delicate balance between transparency and tact, ensuring that their true sentiments were conveyed while maintaining decorum and avoiding scandal. And while the Zanana was largely an institution for women, it wasn't without its power brokers. Some women, such as Jahanara, were highly educated and skilled in various arts and sciences. Others possessed shrewd intelligence, enabling them to navigate the complexities of court politics. While the Zanana was meant to isolate women from the outside world, it didn't prevent them from staying informed. Eunuchs, who acted as intermediaries between the women and the outside world, often carried news and gossip from the royal court. Despite their confined environment, the women were not kept in the dark. They knew of Shah Jahan's obsession with building the Taj Mahal for Mumtaz and how he lavished her with gifts and affection. They also knew about his son's rebellion and eventual defeat and execution. When Darashiko fell, so did Jahanara's hopes for a more normal life. She had always felt drawn to the arts, and during her years in the Zanana she pursued them with passion. Music became her solace, the sitar her faithful companion. With its slender neck and resonating strings, the sitar mirrored her yearning for a life beyond the confines of the palace walls. Its music echoed her joys and sorrows, filling the void left by her isolation. But music was just one of her talents. Jahanara also excelled at painting, particularly on silk, where she found a unique canvas for her creativity. Her paintings were not mere artistic expressions, but stories frozen in time. They depicted scenes from nature, portraits of loved ones, or metaphors for her emotional landscape. Through her art, she documented the passage of time, capturing moments of beauty amidst the monotony of her existence. In the late 1640s, Shah Jahan fell gravely ill, and the court went into a frenzy. All the wives and concubines hoped that it was their chance to become the emperor's favorite and secure their futures. Even Jahanara allowed herself a small glimmer of hope that her father might finally realize her worth. But Shah Jahan recovered and soon after ordered that all the women of the Zenana be fitted with anklets, a permanent reminder of their confinement. He also chose his second wife, Aisha, as his heir, cementing her status as the most favored. Only one thing remained on his agenda: completing the Taj Mahal, the monument to his first wife and his greatest regret. But the construction was far from complete, and the cost was draining the treasury. Reluctantly, Shah Jahan realized he would have to turn to his estranged daughter for help. When he summoned Jahanara, she knew exactly what he wanted. Her father was a master manipulator. He never asked, he took. And what he wanted now was money. Jahanara dutifully handed over her jewelry and precious garments. After all, the Taj was her birthright. What was she but a pawn in her father's game of love and loss? As the years passed, Shah Jahan doted on Aisha, showering her with jewels and ignoring everyone else, including Jahanara. Yet despite this neglect, Jahanara did not waver in her filial duty. When Shah Jahan passed away in 1660 and Aisha became empress, she proved to be a benevolent ruler, redistributing wealth and restoring order to the empire. Meanwhile, Jahanara found solace in the birth of her granddaughter, Roshanara, whom she raised as her own. Though the Zenana had been her prison, her exile had lasted only 23 years. When Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan's third wife, took the throne, she banished her father's favorite, Aisha, to the Zenana, a cruel twist of fate. Jahanara now faced the prospect of spending the rest of her life behind the same walls that had once confined her. But by then, she had grown accustomed to the routine. Besides, she had company. Her daughter, her granddaughter, and her old friend, the Sitar, were all there, and that was enough. Throughout history, countless tales have unfolded within the hallowed halls of the Zenana, each whispering of a world unseen, unheard, and forever shrouded in enigma. But none can match the allure of Jahanara Begum's story, a journey from pampered princess to prisoner of her father's whims. Her narrative serves as a potent reminder of the highs and lows of life and the indelible mark left by our choices. For Jahanara, the Zenana was both a gilded cage and a crucible, shaping her into a woman of unparalleled resilience and grace. Her name was Maranisa. The history remembers her as Nur Jahan, Light of the World. Born in 1577, she entered the Mughal court not as royalty, but through marriage. Widowed early, she later became the 20th and last wife of Emperor Jahangir. From that moment, her ascent was remarkable. Unlike many women in the harem, Nur Jahan did not fade into the background. Quietly, with grace and calculation, she began to wield influence. First through her style, her manner of dressing, her jewelry, her patronage of textiles and perfumes, then through her intelligence. Jahangir found not only comfort in her presence, but counsel. Soon coins bore her name, royal decrees carried her seal. She issued orders, received diplomats, and even appeared briefly in public, veiled but unmistakably powerful. She was not alone in her pursuits. Her father and brother were elevated in courtly ranks, forming what came to be known as the Nur Jahan junta. Her family became a political force in their own right, extending her reach beyond the harem walls. Nur Jahan was also a patron of architecture. She commissioned gardens, mosques, and tombs, serene, symmetrical spaces that reflected the ideals of paradise. One of the most poignant monuments is the tomb she built for her parents, often seen as a precursor to the Taj Mahal, but, like all influence, hers was not eternal. After Jahangir's death, Nur Jahan receded from the center of power. She lived quietly until her death in 1645, in a world she had once shaped so profoundly. Even in retreat, her legacy lingered in fabrics still worn, gardens still blooming, and a courtly tradition that bore the imprint of her elegance and authority. Now, when we talk about the palaces and gardens of the Mughal era, it's hard not to focus on the symmetry. The geometric perfection, the floral waterworks that flowed from fountains and into canals, those are impressive feats of engineering. They're beautiful. But there's more to these places than that. They were also tools of statecraft, particularly during the reign of Emperor Jahangir, who ruled from 1605 to 1627. His empire spanned much of modern-day India and Central Asia. Jahangir loved his garden palaces. He used them to display wealth, sure, but also to communicate ideas about order and beauty and power. That's where Nur Jahan comes in. She was not only his wife, she was his advisor and a keen student of how things were done at court. As historian John F. Richards puts it, she was exceedingly well-suited to advance her personal interests by acclimating herself to the techniques of statecraft. In other words, Nur Jahan was paying attention. She noticed how her husband used gardens and architecture to get across certain messages, and she played to her strengths. When Jahangir died, Nur Jahan outlived him by 23 years. She knew her own worth, and she wasn't about to disappear after Jahangir's death, so she kept learning. Historians have speculated that she could have taken charge when her son was just 14 years old. Instead, she acted as regent while he was still mastering the skills needed to rule one of the largest empires in the world. Let's take a closer look at one of Nur Jahan's projects, the tomb of her parents. It's called the Humayun's tomb, named for her father, Mir Abdul Rahim, who was a courtier and general under Akbar, the Great Mughal. The tomb is in Delhi, an important city for the Miaos, because it was the capital under several emperors. But the tomb itself doesn't lie in the heart of Delhi. It's tucked away in a neighborhood of Nizamuddin, a place of pilgrimage for Muslims, a spiritual center with shrines and dargahs, or tombs of revered saints. It's a bit off the beaten path, but if you go looking for it, you'll find it surrounded by lush gardens that echo the design of paradise. Remember those symbolic gardens from earlier? Yeah, they're like that. Just like those gardens, this tomb is perfectly symmetrical. There are 4 identical sides with identical towers at each corner. If you want to explore further, you can wander down a central path that cuts through flower beds and pools and bridges. All of this geometry serves the purpose of giving form to chaos, offers a vision of order that extends beyond the grave. Symmetry was a popular motif in Islamic art. It signified balance, harmony, even eternal life. At Humayun's tomb, the symmetry is mesmerizing, but it's also a reminder that death is inevitable. That's a recurring theme in mausoleums. Think about the Taj Mahal. But here Nur Jahan turned that on its head. Come back to that. For now, let's take a detour to Istanbul and see how symmetry works in Hagia Sophia. A former church and mosque, now a museum. Take a look at these 2 windows. They're symmetrical, right? They're exactly alike. You get the same view outside. Now imagine taking a hammer to one of them. Suddenly the symmetry is broken. The building itself feels thrown off balance. And that's despite the fact that both windows still do what they were designed to do. This is how our brains process symmetry. We seek it out. It brings us a sense of calm. But as soon as that symmetry is broken, we notice. So now, imagine you're standing in front of Humayun's tomb. You know that every side is identical, but you don't have time to take it all in. Suddenly, someone throws a rock through one of the corner towers. What do you notice first? The rock, obviously. Your brain has processed the destruction of symmetry. But then your eyes settle on the rest of the building. You notice the balance, the harmony. You take in the entire structure. Now that's what Nur Jahan wanted. She understood that people would seek out the tomb, that they'd marvel at the symmetry and then lose themselves in it. And while they were admiring the work, they'd be thinking about her, too. It's a subtle thing, but in a culture that values symmetry, it's impossible to ignore. In the end, Humayun's tomb was meant to be a template of sorts. Nur Jahan recycled its design for another project, the tomb of her husband, Jahangir. Here again, we see the same interest in geometry and paradise gardens. But in this case, there's something different, something personal. Jahangir loved hunting, so his tomb is shaped like a bow and arrow. It's a symbol of his favorite pastime. These buildings weren't just structures made of stone and brick. They were expressions of faith, symbols of eternity, trophies to commemorate a way of life. To appreciate them, you have to understand the culture that produced them. And that means understanding how deeply religious the Mughal emperors were. Islam guided their worldview, their aesthetic, their politics, even their fashion. Think about those women who spent hours upon hours applying gold leaf and jewels to the finest fabrics. They were acting according to Islamic principles. Remember that verse from the Quran that talks about God setting in order the heavens and the earth? Well, creating order was part of the job description for these elite women too. They were beautifying the world and beautifying themselves. Both were acts of worship. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some Muslim clerics took issue with women painting pictures of flowers and foliage. But most scholars accepted these artistic renderings as long as they didn't depict living beings, humans or animals, because then they would take on souls. So instead of people and animals, you get gardens and flowers and trees. It's a way of keeping God in the picture. But sometimes even that wasn't enough. When it wasn't, there was always the last word in fashion, Nur Jahan. She pushed the boundaries of acceptable dress. She favored fitted garments, cinched waists, and sheer overblouses. She collected exquisite jewelry, including some very fine pearls. But she wasn't just wearing pretty clothes. She was making a statement. These choices were all carefully calculated. They were part of her appeal as an individual. She was presenting herself as accomplished, cultivated, educated woman who could read poetry and write elegant verse herself. These fashions became so closely associated with her that they took on a new name, Lahori style, named for her hometown of Lahore. And it wasn't just her looks. When she hosted parties, she dressed up her maids and servants in fine garments too. It was a spectacle. It was a way of showing off the talent in her court, kind of like a runway show. These displays were a big deal. In fact, Emperor Jahangir complained that his wife's love of fashion was getting out of hand. He worried that she was spending too much money on clothing and accessories. Like, seriously. He wrote letters to her saying things like, "Your excessive taste for finery is ruining my treasury." But he also acknowledged that she was good at what she did. In his autobiography, Jahangir writes, "Her skill in arranging the dresses and the various ornaments of ladies is such that she adorns them with the utmost elegance." He goes on to say that her efforts to beautify women make him think, quote, "What a great artist God is himself." And that's another key insight into Mughal art and architecture. For these builders, creating beauty was a religious act. They saw God as an artist, and they were emulating him. Nur Jahan was the best at emulating God, at least according to Jahangir. He gave her the title Anirudula, meaning light of the world. She was celebrated in poetry and song. But she never forgot that the light could be turned off just as quickly. When Jahangir died in 1627, she was accused of poisoning him. Whether she was guilty or not doesn't really matter. The accusation stuck. She had rivals waiting in the wings. One of them was Jahangir's widow, a young woman named Mumtaz Mahal. You might know her story. She's the one whose tomb inspired the Taj Mahal, and once Nur Jahan lost favor at court, she retreated to her palace. The one in Lahore, along with her daughter and son-in-law, Shah Jahan. That's the guy responsible for the Taj. And though Nur Jahan spent her final years out of power, she left her mark on the Mughal Empire. She helped shape its art, its architecture, its fashion. She even introduced the concept of portraiture to the Mughal court. The paintings done of her may not have been super realistic, but they did capture her personality, which is why we remember her today. So the next time you hear the term light of the world, think of Nur Jahan. If you want to learn more about what happened to Jahangir's widow and the construction of the Taj Mahal, check out this playlist. Thanks for watching. So imagine a city that rose from the red earth like a vision. Its palaces and mosques and courtyards all planned with spiritual precision. Fateh Sikri was Emperor Akbar's grand experiment. Built in the late 1500s, it was meant to be not just a capital, but a reflection of a new kind of rule, where religion, philosophy, and architecture intertwined. The city sits near Agra, and even today its sandstone structures remain hauntingly intact. There is the Buland Darwaza, a monumental gateway that greets the sky. There is the Diwan-i-Khas, where Akbar held philosophical debates under a carved stone throne. There are palaces for his queens, each different, each symbolic.
Ow.
Red sandstone is a dominant feature, but so is white marble, delicate and fine, which contrasts with the coarseness of the earth and gives a sense of lightness to the grand design. White marble outlines the red sandstone, tracing patterns across courts and buildings. One historian described this as a city made of red sand turned white with milk. That's a beautiful way to put it. But what was Akbar thinking when he planned this city? And why was it abandoned after just a few decades? Let's begin with the question of why. Why build a new capital so far from the seat of power? Why here? The answer lies with the mystic. Akbar, you see, desired a male heir. His wife, Maryam Zamani, bore him only daughters. So he went to see the Sufi Saint Salim Chishti, who predicted the birth of a son. When the prophecy proved true, Akbar built his city near the saint's home. The tomb still rests at the city's heart, quiet, with white marble walls that seem to glow under the moon. Fatehpur Sikri was never intended as a permanent capital. It was a stop along the way. The idea was to base the empire here, while campaigns were fought elsewhere to expand it. Besides, Agra was never too far away. In fact, most of the sandstone for Fatehpur Sikri was quarried just 4 kilometers from Agra, so the material was literally an extension of the old city. In many ways, Fatehpur Sikri was an experiment, an attempt to build the ideal city, a utopian vision. Its very name means the city of victory. It was meant to be a symbol of the empire's religious harmony, a secular ideal Akbar championed. He broke from the past by building a mosque alongside a Hindu temple, a Jain shrine, and a church. All faiths faced the same way, their spires piercing the same heavens. The city was also a showcase of power. Its wide boulevards and monumental gateways were designed to impress. The emperor's palace complex was a microcosm of the empire itself. Within its high walls were residences for officials from every corner of the realm, each group living according to its customs, yet united under one roof. It was also a city of ideas. The Duanakas, or the Hall of Private Audience, is perhaps the most intriguing part of the complex. This is where Akbar held court, not to dispense swift justice or make snap decisions, but to engage in thoughtful debate. He would sit on a raised platform beneath a carved stone throne in the shape of a lotus. The hall is surrounded by 40 pillars, each intricately carved with figures from Hindu epics like the Ramayana. They watched silently as Akbar discussed theology, philosophy, and poetry with his court. Scholars from across the empire came to present their ideas, and some became quite powerful, like the philosopher Abdul Rahim, whose couplets are still read today. Some historians believe it was here, amidst these silent stone witnesses, Akbar formulated his new religion, a syncretic faith called Dinil-Hi, meaning the divine law. 8. It combined elements from Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Jainism, and it was meant to be universal, a way of life for all. Only about 200 courtiers and servants adopted it. Yet the very idea was radical, an early example of how religions can be synthesized, how different paths lead to the same truth. We don't know exactly why Fatehpur Sikri was abandoned. The usual explanation is lack of water, but recent research suggests political unrest may have played a role. In any case, after less than 30 years, the city was empty. The emperor's grandson, Shah Jahan, shifted the capital back to Agra, yet it wasn't completely abandoned. For a time, it served as a prison. Then it disappeared from official records. The buildings were stripped of their embellishments and left to crumble. Nature reclaimed the empty halls, vines creeping up the silent pillars. It was rediscovered in the 19th century, and now it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Walking through its empty courtyards today, one hears echoes, the faint whisper of silk, the clink of metal, the murmurs of prayer and power. It's hard to believe that so much grandeur can be reduced to ruins, so much thought and toil turned to dust. Yet here it is, a city paused mid-thought, never destroyed, just left behind. The sun, when it rises over Agra, does so in splendor. Its first light paints the white marble of the Taj Mahal with honey hues, transforming the monument from an ivory dream to a glowing masterpiece. As the day progresses, the sky as vast canvas shifts from azure to the deep purples of dusk, framing the Taj against a backdrop of romance and nostalgia. Such magnificence was not merely a spectacle for the common folk. It was a daily affirmation of power and beauty for the emperors of the Mughal Empire. Among them, Jahangir, whose reign stretched from 1605 to 1627, stands out as a patron of art and architecture. His obsession with capturing the essence of the natural world was unmatched, influencing artistic trends across India.
Oh.
During his rule, the walls of his palace weren't just adorned with precious stones. They were adorned with paintings that celebrated flora and fauna. Each stroke on a canvas was a testament to nature's grandeur, a reflection of the emperor's perspective. Jahangir's son, Shah Jahan. The man who built the Taj after the demise of his beloved wife Mumtaz, continued this tradition. His empire, which flourished from 1628 to 1658, was marked by architectural marvels like the Red Fort in Delhi and the magnificent city of Shah Jahanabad. Now, Old Delhi, for him to art was a tool of expression, a way to immortalize beauty and convey emotions that words sometimes fail to capture. Yet it was under the reign of Jahangir and Shah Jahan that the Mughal Empire reached its zenith, both in terms of territorial control and cultural refinement. However, this era was not without its share of tragedies and intrigues. The rivalry between Shah Jahan's sons for the throne led to the construction of two more magnificent monuments: Humayun's tomb and Itmad Adalah's tomb, also known as the Jewel Box. These structures, while testaments to love and grief, were also a silent reminder of the complexities of family bonds and the ruthlessness of the game of succession. Welcome to our channel. Today we'll take you on a journey back in time to explore the lives of these princes, their ambitions, rivalries, and the pressures that shaped them. Their story is one of luxury, intrigue, and the constant struggle to secure a legacy. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to never miss any of our exciting episodes. Now let's delve into the opulent yet treacherous world of the Mughal princes. The weight of a crown is often exaggerated until you find yourself living under one. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that every decision, every breath you take, is observed. Your actions don't just reflect on you, they reflect on your lineage, your empire, and your god. This was the reality for the princes of the Mughal Empire. They were not just heirs to a throne, they were vessels of a dynasty's honor. For many, life began with lessons, not the carefree kind you learn as a child, but regimented instructions in subjects ranging from theology to statecraft. While most princes would have preferred a dawn filled with laughter and games, their tutors arrived before the sun, eager to mold young minds into those capable of ruling. By the time the princes were old enough to ride a horse, they were well versed in religion, history, and the arts. Their lessons were not confined to dusty texts, but were as expansive as the empire itself. They learned about trade routes across Asia, military strategies from legendary warriors, and the intricacies of managing a kingdom that spanned diverse cultures. Each prince was a pawn in a game of succession, where the board was vast and the stakes were high. Brothers were not just siblings, they were competitors. The bond of brotherhood was overshadowed by the ambition to outshine, outmaneuver, and ultimately outlast. The love of a father for his sons was often overshadowed by the duty to choose a successor. Jahangir and Shah Jahan, despite doting on their children, were more keen observers than indulgent parents. They watched their sons closely, assessing their strengths, weaknesses, and ambitions. It was a careful balancing act to ensure the empire's continuity without igniting a fratricidal war. Amidst this pressure cooker environment, alliances were forged and broken. Politics seeped into every aspect of life, making every interaction a potential minefield. Flattery and backhanded compliments became tools, as did veiled threats and subtle jabs. A poem dedicated to the emperor was not just an ode, it was a political statement. A prince's marriage wasn't just a union of two families, it was a strategic alliance. Each celebration was a grand spectacle, each ceremony a veiled power play. The princes, though pampered and privileged, grew up in an atmosphere of constant uncertainty. The security they enjoyed was fragile, existing only as long as they remained useful pawns in their father's game. Outside the palace walls, the world awaited, ready to be shaped by the decisions made within those opulent confines. The fate of millions rested on the choices these princes would make, the rivals they would forge, and the enemies they would create. The princes of the Mughal Empire lived lives of luxury few can imagine. They rode horses that were jewels on four legs, animals bred for speed and beauty, often gifted or acquired through conquests. These weren't just mounts, they were status symbols. Each stallion was a testament to the rider's power, its lineage, and its prowess. The princes were taught to ride before they could read, to handle a sword before they could write. Horseback riding wasn't just a pastime, it was a necessity. It was a skill that set them apart, preparing them for a life where every move was calculated and every gesture was amplified. Their palaces weren't just residences, they were fortresses of luxury. Built from materials like red sandstone and white marble, they shimmered against the Indian sky. Within these structures were courtyards that echoed with the laughter of children and the whispers of courtiers. There were halls for audiences, libraries filled with ancient texts, and gardens that bloomed with exotic flowers and trickling fountains. These palaces weren't just places to live, they were showcases of power. Every arch, every inlay, and every fresco was designed to impress, to remind the residents of their exalted status, and to intimidate any who dared challenge it. The food on their tables wasn't just sustenance. It was a feast for the eyes and the palate. Ingredients were sourced from across the empire, from the spices of the south to the fruits of the northwest. Each dish was a masterpiece, a fusion of flavors and textures that tantalized the taste buds. Ingredients were measured, not in handfuls or pinches, but in gold and silver weights. The presentation was as important as the recipe. With each course served on 24-karat gold plates and each drink mixed in crystal goblets, such extravagance wasn't just about indulgence. It was a symbol of the empire's wealth, a tangible representation of the prosperity it provided. Yet behind this facade of opulence, the princes lived lives dictated by rules. Their every move was monitored, their words carefully chosen, their friendships scrutinized. It was a life of gilded cages, where luxury was abundant, but freedom was scarce. Where Shah Jahan, the newly enthroned emperor of the Mughal Empire, standing in the shadow of the majestic Taj Mahal, a monument to love and loss built by your father Jahangir. Before you lies a vast empire, a tapestry of cultures waiting to be led. Beside you stand your sons, Darashiko, the eldest, known for his wisdom and religious tolerance, Aurangzeb, the ambitious and ruthless, and Murad Bakhtiar, the youngest, often overlooked but harboring resentment. Each of your sons represents a different path for the empire. Dara is the scholar, the bridge between faiths, a symbol of unity. Aurangzeb is the conqueror, eager to expand the empire's borders, a beacon of military might. And Murad, driven by jealousy and desperation, could prove to be a wild card, a threat to the very fabric of your dynasty. As you look at them, you remember your own journey, the years spent honing your skills, waiting for your turn, watching your father rule. You recall the lessons he taught you, the rivalries he fostered, and the intrigues he navigated. Now it's your turn to navigate the treacherous waters of succession, ensuring that the empire's crown doesn't descend into a fratricidal war. But how do you balance the aspirations of your sons with the stability of your empire? How do you manage their rivalries without igniting open conflict? And what will you do when the inevitable showdown arises? Will you choose the scholar, the warrior, or perhaps someone else entirely? These questions echo through history, reminding us that even in the gilded world of royalty, choices have consequences. The decisions you make today, whether as an emperor or a prince, shape not just your legacy, but the very destiny of an empire. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and share it with your friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comments below, so keep them coming. We're excited to continue bringing you more captivating historical tales. Till next time, stay curious and keep exploring with us. And so we leave the Mughal world, its harems, its courts, its silent cities. It was a world of contradictions, beauty and confinement, power and waiting, devotion and ambition. As you return to your own world now, perhaps with the sound of a soft flute lingering in your mind, let the quiet lessons of the past settle around you. In the stillness of night, history breathes gently. And in its slow unfolding, it reminds us that lives once lived, though veiled. Distant and strange, we're not so different from our own. Rest well, and until next time, may the past continue to keep you company in your dreams. The Roman Empire was a machine of contradictions. It built aqueducts and gladiators. It gave us roads in ruin. For every senator in marble halls, there were thousands living by torchlight, fetching water or waiting in line at the latrine. And yet there was rhythm, order, ritual. From the latrines of Rome to the halls of Pompeii, life carried on. As you settle into sleep, perhaps you carry with you the soft murmur of Roman gossip, the flicker of a lamplight ceremony, the hush of footsteps on mosaic tiles. And in contrast, the quiet of your own room. Good night. Emperor Nero is having a bad day. He is woken early, agitated, unable to sleep despite the protests of his concubines. He demands wine, but Poppaea, his wife, orders the servants to bring water instead. He throws a tantrum, then sets off for his palace gardens, pacing restlessly among the trees. He pauses at the familiar sight of the golden statue depicting him as Apollo, then turns back toward the palace, stumbles upon a slave hauling to pots of urine, and demands to know what the slave is carrying. Upon learning it is for cleaning, he orders the slave to empty a pot on his head. He stands there while the urine drips through his fingers and clothes, all the while thinking to himself, "Why am I so upset? After all, what do I have to complain about? My life is wonderful." In 64, Rome burned, but he saved the survivors by welcoming them to live in his lavish palace. He ended slavery throughout the empire, right? He built the first public bathhouses and latrines, or so he thought, for everyone to enjoy. He took pride in his horsemanship and the construction of a magnificent stable for his horses, as well as a circus where chariot races could be held all year round, rain or shine. Nero also proudly recounts to himself the destruction of the Christians and how he single-handedly rooted an entire rebellion by Jewish Sicarii assassins. He completed his tour of the grounds, made it back to the palace, and settled on the couch for breakfast. His food arrived. Delicious dishes of fish, fowl, fruit, and bread accompanied by expensive wines. He ate and drank until he needed to relieve himself, so he excused himself to the bathroom. There he climbed onto the luxurious golden throne. Was this the finest latrine in all of Rome? Perhaps. Nero would have been hard-pressed to name a room in his vast palace that he hated more. He tried to relax, but anxiety overwhelmed him. Suddenly the door flew open, and his freed slave Pythagoras stood there trembling. "Emperor," stammered Pythagoras, "you must come quickly. Your golden chariot awaits." With a sigh, Nero rose from the throne and headed out of the bathroom. He walked past Pythagoras and stopped. "For a moment you look upset," he said. "I am sorry, Emperor, but I cannot help myself. I must go to the bathroom." Nero looked at his slave with disgust. "You want to use my golden throne?" "No, my Emperor. I seek only the latrina." Then Nero became enraged. He struck Pythagoras across the face. "How dare you speak to me of latrines when you have seen what comforts I can provide? Never again will I allow you to speak of bathrooms as if they are beneath you." Pythagoras recoiled in pain, then answered, "But my Emperor, sometimes a man just needs to use a bathroom." Nero threw him back into the latrine and locked the door. "Use the luxuries I provide," he yelled, "or get out of my palace." Pythagoras climbed onto the throne, sat down and sighed. What a great emperor he served. Did Romans use toilet paper? Technically, Romans did not use toilet paper as we understand it, but they did keep a kind of toilet paper in stock for visitors to their public latrines, a common implement being a small branch or twig like what you might find in a park. However, much more common was a small sponge on a stick. And this is the toilet paper we are going to try to recreate today. How do we know that they used sponges on sticks? Because they left us pictures of it. These little tools would be soaked in either fresh or stale urine, which would help remove impurities and odor. The urine wasn't necessarily clean, but it was better than nothing. We also know that ancient Romans enjoyed a good laugh. But in the public bathroom, you might have laughed and pointed at the wrong person. If you weren't careful, Roman public latrines were like the airport security line. Everyone was in a hurry to get in, and everyone was in a hurry to get out. They were also very popular places to meet friends, gossip, or in the case of Roman emperors, throw temper tantrums. Like any bathroom, they attracted a variety of individuals. However, unlike our bathrooms, patrons of the public latrines couldn't lock themselves inside for privacy. So people often found themselves sitting next to strangers as they relieved themselves, creating an environment ripe for socializing, even if no one wanted to talk to anyone else. The Roman Empire was large and diverse. Its territories spanned 3 continents. The empire was ethnically and linguistically diverse, and the sheer size of Rome itself was daunting. Not surprisingly, sanitation systems varied widely across the empire. While the Romans built impressive aqueducts to supply fresh water to their cities, waste disposal was less of a priority. The Forum, the center of Roman political life, had no public toilets at all. Senators simply relieved themselves nearby in taverns or shops, which must have made campaigning for public office a truly disgusting endeavor. In wealthier homes, wealthy Romans employed slaves to empty chamber pots during the night. Those wastes were then tossed out in the morning and likely dumped into a public latrine. Patrons of the public latrines were accustomed to such sights and smells, and some even developed immunity to the stench. In fact, the richer folk would sometimes pay to have their excrement dumped at the public latrines, so that they wouldn't have to deal with it themselves. Because the floors of many Roman houses were made of marble, wood, or brick, solid waste was easier to pick up and dump elsewhere. Liquid waste, however, posed a greater problem. To solve it, Romans invented a type of siphon toilet called a cacum nocturnum. The solid waste would be deposited into a hole near the top of the bowl. Next, the attendant would pour water into the bowl, which would then flow into the bottom of the bowl through a pipe. This would flush the excrement into a sewer line and carry it away. Because they were typically installed in taverns and brothels, these toilets would often overflow and break down, leading to a mess on the floor. The golden age of Roman plumbing began under Nero, who connected the sewers to the public baths. Nero also built the first covered public latrines in Rome, though their use was limited due to their expensive upkeep. Later, emperors continued the practice of building free public latrines throughout Rome. In addition to their practical purpose, these structures were intended to demonstrate imperial benevolence, sort of like free public bathrooms at airports today. Nonetheless, these efforts could not hope to match the number of latrines needed to serve the city's population. So privately owned latrines remained commonplace throughout Rome, although they were often shared by several families. Business owners saw them as a necessary evil to attract customers. In contrast to Rome, Pompeii had a more extensive plumbing system. Unlike Rome, which had primarily stone drains, Pompeii's plumbing system consisted of clay pipes. Unfortunately for the people of Pompeii, the pipes were susceptible to cracks, leading to breaks in the city's sewage system. In addition to its public bathrooms, Pompeii had the first public toilets specifically for women. Unlike the men's public bathrooms, the women's rooms had running water. Nevertheless, these amenities may have done little to alleviate the widespread practice of defecating in the streets. That was certainly true in Athens, where oaths were even inscribed on pieces of pottery, forbidding the citizens from relieving themselves in the streets. But in Athens, few cared to enforce the rules. The Athenians were so disgusted by the state of the public toilets that they preferred to use the streets instead. Even in the Greek East, public restrooms were unpleasant, with patrons complaining about their filthy condition. In Alexandria, Emperor Septimius Severus ordered that public bathrooms be built around the city, but they were almost never maintained. One visitor to the city described the experience of using one of these public bathrooms in vivid detail. The doors are closed with wooden shutters, and you can tell by the sounds within them whether the people who have entered are Greeks or barbarians. On entering, you will find a stone bench with a hole in it facing you, and a stone basin nearby for the purpose of washing. When you have done the deed, you should wash your hands in the basin and wipe yourself with a piece of linen, which is suspended nearby by a hook. Then you depart, leaving the place as you found it. While not quite as graphic, that description isn't much different from the reviews of Roman public latrines. The patron sat on a stone bench over a deep hole. Below the hole, water flowed through a channel, carrying waste away. Once finished, the patron would cleanse himself with water from another nearby spout and perhaps a small brush. The cleaning was considered important to prevent illness. After all, diseases were thought to be caused by an imbalance of humors, and the improper removal of excrement was believed to cause an imbalance. In the absence of proper ventilation, latrines often became unsanitary, and the presence of human waste encouraged the growth of mold, mildew, and fungi. The mixture of decaying waste, stagnant water, and stale urine produced an unforgettable stench. To combat this, many public latrines had a small fountain built into the side of the bathroom to help purify the air. As patrons waited their turn on the cold, hard benches, they engaged in conversation with one another, making the latrines a hotbed for gossip, news, and rumors. Such chatter often centered around the politics of the day or current events, since the latrines were frequented by both the upper and lower classes. In fact, the latrines were one of the few places where people of all social classes interacted freely. As a result, the conversations that took place there often influenced public opinion and helped shape the course of Roman history. What are your thoughts on Roman public latrines? Would you rather use a public bathroom today or a Roman public latrine? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more videos. The Emperor Caligula has gone down in history as an absolute monster, but also as a bit of a weirdo. What if I told you that there were some ancient Romans who would have looked at his behavior and said, "Dude, seriously, get your head examined"? Well, if you want to find out how bizarre and controversial the Roman Emperor Caligula really was, keep watching. In the heart of ancient Rome, nestled amidst the bustling crowds and the towering monuments, lay a hidden sanctuary dedicated to Mithras, the god of light. This subterranean sanctuary, carved deep into the very core of the Palatine Hill, was not just a place of worship, it was a secret world. Here, soldiers and civilians alike gathered in solemn rituals, far from the prying eyes of the public. It was here that the mysteries of Mithras were celebrated, and it is here that we must journey to understand the enigmatic allure of this secret society. Step into the shadowy depths of the Roman catacombs where darkness is the only illumination you'll find. Here, amid the labyrinth of tunnels, you will witness the somber reality of early Christian persecution. You'll encounter haunting images of those who lost their lives in the name of faith, their bodies laid to rest in the cramped confines of the catacombs. These subterranean labyrinths served as a refuge, a place where Christians could worship in secret, their faith a flickering flame in the oppressive darkness. Their stories echo through the ages, reminding us of the courage it took to practice their beliefs in the face of persecution. But today we are going to explore another mystery. The air within the chambers is thick with incense, mingling with the murmur of voices reciting ancient prayers. You can see that the walls are adorned with intricate carvings depicting scenes from the life of Mithras, the god of light. The worshippers of Mithras, known as the Mithraic mysteries, were drawn from all walks of life. Soldiers, merchants, slaves, and even senators found solace and brotherhood in this secret cult. Its appeal transcended social boundaries, uniting men under the banner of a shared faith. Mithras, often depicted as a winged bull, was a deity of multiple identities, his origins shrouded in mystery. Some believed him to be a Persian god, brought to Rome by soldiers returning from the east. Others saw him as an embodiment of the Roman spirit, representing the values of courage, discipline, and resilience. Whatever his origins, Mithras had become a symbol of hope in a world often dominated by darkness and despair. As you venture deeper into the sanctuaries, you will discover a series of chambers, each with its own sacred purpose. There is the naos, the main chamber where the chief priest, the hierophant, would perform the most sacred rituals. The adjacent cella housed a small temple where statues of Mithras and other deities stood silently, their marble eyes gazing into the abyss. The most intriguing aspect of these underground sanctuaries lies in the rituals that took place within them. The Mithraic mysteries were renowned for their initiation rites, which were said to be profoundly transformative experiences. The initiates, both men and women, were led through a series of symbolic trials that tested their faith and their resolve. They were taught secret doctrines, and their very understanding of the cosmos was challenged. The rituals were not merely a display of devotion, they were a descent into the depths of the human psyche, a confrontation with the mysteries of life, death, and rebirth. What if you could travel back in time, catch a glimpse of these secret ceremonies before they vanished into the mists of antiquity? Imagine yourself as a newcomer seeking to join the order, standing at the entrance to the sanctuary, eager to take the first steps on your path to enlightenment. But before you can enter, you are stopped in your tracks. Standing before you are two imposing figures, the custodes, the guardians of the sacred mysteries. Their presence is a silent testament to the secrecy that permeates these underground chambers. They are the gatekeepers of a world where only the initiated may truly comprehend the profound teachings that are shared. As the custodians size you up, you feel a mixture of excitement and trepidation. You are about to embark on a journey that will forever change your perspective on the world. With a slight nod of their heads, the custodians part ways, allowing you to step into the dimly lit passageway leading to the sanctuary. The air grows heavy with anticipation as you move deeper into the catacombs, the flickering light of your torch dancing on the rough-hewn walls. You hear the sound of chanting, low and resonant, echoing through the underground chambers. It's a language you do not understand, yet the words seem to resonate with a power that transcends the spoken word. As you turn a corner, the source of the chanting becomes clear. In the center of a large chamber, a group of men stand in a circle, their voices rising and falling in unison. Their leader, the high priest, the Hierophant, is adorned in white robes, his face partially hidden behind a golden mask that symbolizes the god Mithras. The other worshippers, dressed in simple white tunics, sway gently, their eyes closed in deep concentration. The ritual is mesmerizing, a hypnotic dance of sound and movement that seems to transport them to another realm. The Hierophant raises his hands, palms outward, and the chanting subsides into a hush. He turns to you, his gaze intense and knowing. In that moment, you feel a sense of recognition, as though you have known him for centuries. He gestures for you to approach and you step forward, drawn by an invisible force. As you come closer, you realize that the chamber is filled with symbols and carvings depicting scenes from the life of Mithras. On the walls, the god is shown in various forms, as a warrior, a healer, a king. Each image is a puzzle piece in the grand tapestry of his teachings. Now, let's talk about the Emperor Caligula. When he came to power, the Senate breathed a collective sigh of relief. Finally, they thought, an end to Tiberius' debauchery and tyranny. The young Caligula was seen as a fresh start, a chance to steer the empire back on course. How wrong they were. Caligula wasted no time in making his presence felt throughout the empire. His first acts as emperor were bold and decisive, aimed at showcasing his power and authority. One of his earliest moves was to grant an audience to ambassadors from various nations, a symbolic gesture intended to demonstrate his commitment to diplomacy and foreign affairs. He listened intently to their pleas and promises, carefully weighing the interests of Rome against those of distant realms. He then turned his attention to the Roman people, addressing them with grand proclamations that resonated with the common folk. He promised to alleviate their burdens, to protect their interests, and to restore Rome's former glory. The crowds cheered, their hopes and dreams for a better future being personified in the young emperor. With the support of the populace firmly behind him, Caligula set his sights on the Senate, the seat of Roman aristocracy. He made strategic alliances, forming partnerships with influential senators to secure their backing for his ambitious plans. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required finesse and political acumen to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics. However, as the years went by, Caligula's demeanor underwent a drastic transformation. The same man who had charmed and cajoled now lashed out, his charm replaced by a chilling ruthlessness. Senators who had once supported him found themselves at the receiving end of his wrath, accused of plotting against him and swiftly dealt with. The people, too, who had initially embraced him as a liberator, were left bewildered by his increasingly erratic behavior. One moment he might be bestowing gifts upon the masses, the next he might be unleashing violence upon them. His decisions became more and more irrational, his logic skewed, and whispers of madness began to circulate throughout the empire. So let us ask, did the orators in the Roman Senate know of the dark machinations taking place beneath their very feet? Did they sense the growing unease in the hearts of the people? Perhaps they did. After all, how can one remain oblivious to the rumblings of discontent when the foundations of society begin to tremble? In the bowels of Rome, in the dimly lit sanctuaries of the cult of Mithras, a different kind of revolution was brewing. It was not a revolution of swords and shields, but of ideas and beliefs. The followers of Mithras, united by their faith in the God of Light, were a community of seekers. Individuals who yearned for meaning in a world often shrouded in darkness. They found solace in the teachings of Mithras, a beacon of hope in turbulent times. Perhaps it was this very sanctuary that offered a glimmer of understanding, a place where the orators could have sought answers in the midst of Caligula's madness. Maybe they whispered their concerns to the high priest, the keeper of ancient wisdom, hoping for guidance in these troubled times. The priest, with his deep understanding of human nature and the complexities of the soul, would have listened intently. He would have seen the turmoil in their eyes, the fear and uncertainty that plagued their thoughts. In the hallowed halls of the cult, surrounded by the symbols of a faith that transcended earthly troubles, the orators might have found a temporary respite from the pressures of the Roman world. They could have knelt before the statues of Mithras and his companions, seeking strength and clarity in a world that seemed to be losing its way. And as they prayed, the orators might have caught glimpses of a different Rome, a Rome guided by the principles of light, a Rome where reason and enlightenment prevailed. In this underground sanctuary, as far from the intrigues of the palace and the shadows cast by Caligula's paranoia, the orators could have momentarily forgotten their worries. They could have left the catacombs feeling renewed, ready to face the challenges of the Roman world with a semblance of calm. The priests of Mithras would have understood the orators' quandary, for they, too, had navigated the complexities of living under a capricious ruler. They knew the importance of finding solace in the face of adversity, of seeking refuge in faith. The orators, with their duty to uphold the ideals of Rome, must have appreciated this haven, this place where the whispers of the wind through the catacombs carried secrets of an eternal flame. A flame that flickered with the promise of a brighter tomorrow, a tomorrow where the light of reason would chase away the darkness of Caligula's madness. But as the sun set over the Palatine Hill, casting long shadows over the Roman streets, the orators would have to emerge from their sanctuary, carrying with them the faint echoes of hope and the fading warmth of the eternal flame. Did the high priest of Mithras warn them? Perhaps he did. As the orators made their way back into the sunlight, their minds might have been filled with the teachings of their faith. Did he remind them of the strength that lay in unity, the power that resided in their shared beliefs? Did he encourage them to be beacons of light in the darkness, to resist the encroaching shadows? The priest, steeped in the wisdom of ages past, would have understood the precarious balance that held Roman society together. He would have known that the cracks were showing, that the foundations were weakening under the weight of Caligula's erratic rule. The orators, the custodians of Rome's traditions and laws, were vital to this balance. They were the bulwarks against chaos, the defenders of the old ways. But how could they defend Rome when faced with the enigma of Caligula? How could they uphold the ideals of their ancestors when confronted with the madness of a godlike ruler? It is possible that in the secluded chambers of the cult, in the hushed tones of prayer and contemplation, the orators grappled with these questions. They sought guidance not only from the high priest, but also from their own convictions, their own sense of justice and order. The priest, with his deep understanding of human nature and the intricacies of the divine plan, might have urged the orators to remain steadfast. He would have reminded them of the importance of their role in Roman society, of the trust placed in them by generations past. The orators, upon hearing these words, might have felt a surge of resolve. They would have realized that they could not falter, that they could not succumb to fear or despair. They were the guardians of Rome, and it was their duty to protect her, even in the darkest of times. Yet as the orators returned to the Senate, the grandeur of the past still echoed in their ears. Did the high priest bid them farewell with a final piece of advice? A parting message that encapsulated the essence of their faith and the strength that resided within them. It is conceivable that he did, for the priest, deeply rooted in the traditions of the cult, would have known the significance of imparting wisdom at such a crucial juncture. He might have spoken of the unwavering spirit of Mithras, the god of light, urging the orators to channel that indomitable spirit within themselves. The orators, with their duty to serve Rome, their great city, would have embraced these words as a guiding light. They would have recognized the parallels between their mission and that of Mithras, both striving to bring light into darkness. As the orators took their leave, perhaps the high priest offered a silent prayer, a fervent plea to the gods for the safety and well-being of those who walked the perilous paths of Roman politics. With a final nod, the orators stepped out of the sanctuary, ready to confront the challenges that awaited them. They carried with them the teachings of Mithras, the strength of their convictions, and the hope for a better tomorrow. For a brief moment, the orators felt a sense of unity, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. They were more than just members of the Roman Senate. They were emissaries of light, champions of reason, and seekers of truth. It's easy to think of ancient Rome as synonymous with civilization, progress, even enlightenment. For every brutal conquest or shameless luxury, there was also a public bathhouse, an aqueduct, a carefully planned forum. But as well organized and practical as much of Rome's public life was, its private side was altogether wilder and more unpredictable. The Roman Empire was hardly unique in this regard. Private lives everywhere have always been messy, complicated affairs. But if we want to understand the private lives of ancient Romans, we need to be careful. We can't just imagine them living like they're betters in the Italian peninsula. We need to learn how to see beyond what was public, to dig under the streets and uncover what was kept secret. Because there, in the shadows beneath Roman streets and fortresses, among the flickering light of oil lamps and the scent of burnt offerings, followers of Mithras gathered. The cult was not public. It was not for women, nor for the faint of heart. It drew soldiers mostly, and men in search of brotherhood, mystery, and strength. They were called Mithreta, and they followed a god whose origins lay far outside the Roman world, in Persia, India, and Central Asia. By the time he appeared in Rome, though, Mithras had shed most traces of his eastern past, and was presented as the son of the sky god. The supreme authority in heaven and earth, his chief symbol was a bull. In fact, the entire cult was built around one central myth. One day a bull was to appear in the heavens, guided by a dog and accompanied by a scorpion. This was the moment when men would become immortal. But it didn't happen right away. First, the bull had to be slain. And this was the moment for Mithras, armed with a dagger and radiating divine light, to take action. He dispatched the bull with 5 deadly blows, after which a 6th blow brought it back to life. Thus did the god conquer death. As surely as the bull was slain, so too would it be reborn, shedding its mortal coils only to assume new ones. And so the faithful learned that they too would die and rise again. Oh, this sounds pretty dark, and that's putting it mildly. The cult of Mithras was not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. The Romans themselves described its initiates as ver perfectissimus, or perfect men. But this wasn't a virtue of character. Rather, it referred to the initiate's willingness to push his body to its physical limits, too fast, to endure hardship and emerge the other side.
Oh!
Stronger and more resolute than before. Membership in the cult came with strict rules. Once a candidate was accepted, he could never reveal what went on inside the Mithraeum. And that's why our understanding of the cult is so fragmentary today. There was no room for loose lips in this business. The rituals were veiled in secrecy. But what happened within the Mithraeum? How did initiates go from candidates to full members? To answer these questions, we'll have to venture inside. Imagine yourself walking through a narrow, torchlit corridor. You're in a Roman city, probably in the 1st or 2nd century AD. On either side, the walls are covered with graffiti, some rude, some reverent. Ahead, the passage opens up, and you find yourself in a small, dark chamber, a sort of artificial cave. Around you are stone benches where initiates sat in a circle. Opposite you in the semi-darkness is a raised platform. Don't know what's on it, only that it's covered with a heavy curtain. You wait. Then the curtain parts and you peer through. At the end of the platform, barely visible in the shadows, is a single statue. Unadorned and unremarkable except for the fact that it depicts the god Mithras slaying the bull. Behind him stretches the cavern mouth, filled with light. Behind you rumbles the noise of the city, but here, deep in the sanctuary, all is silent. As you turn away, the curtain falls and you rejoin the others. You don't know what to make of it. Was that really Mithras himself? Did you see him slay the bull and bring it back to life? Some of the others seem satisfied, but most have somber expressions on their faces. Later, you will come to understand that this statue was the Lord of the Mysteries. It was the very image of Mithras. In front of it, initiates performed the central ritual of the cult, and they did so for 7 long years. Each year they renewed the rites connected to the killing and rebirth of the bull, and each time, the veil between the real world and the realm of the dead grew thinner.
Us.
That's because the bull represented more than just a simple beast. It symbolized blood, life, rebirth. It was, in fact, a type of Osiris, the Egyptian god of the underworld. But whereas Osiris was murdered and never returned, the bull in the myth of Mithras was reborn. It was killed and rose again. And with it, the faithful learned that they too would one day be reborn. The journey toward that knowledge was not an easy one. It was a path made up of 7 ranks, and each level involved secret tests, solemn oaths, and silent lessons. The lowest rank was that of the raven, and the highest was the father. Along the way, initiates were expected to fast, pray, and abstain from pleasure. They would attend plays that reenacted the triumphs of Mithras. They might have taken part in mock battles with wooden swords. They would have watched the other initiates perform their mysterious rites. And somewhere along the way, they took on the title of Miles or Soldier. This was especially true in the military installations where the cult was particularly popular. These recruits were still anonymous, wore no distinctive clothing, and kept their identities secret. If anyone asked who they were, they simply replied, "I am a soldier of the Roman army." But after 6 years of training, they were ready for the final test. They would stand alone in the semi-darkness of the Mithraeum and swear an oath of secrecy. After that, they emerged into the light as full initiates. Now they were allowed to wear distinctive clothing and bear the title of Mithra. They were finally ready to participate in the mysteries of Mithras. But this initiation, too, was only for men. Women could never enter the Mithraeum. If you were a woman in the Roman world, you couldn't participate in any of the cults of the mysteries. It wasn't that you weren't allowed to worship. You could certainly pray at temples and offer sacrifices to the gods, but you could never partake in the deeper rituals. That distinction was reserved for men, and the reason for that is obvious. The Roman world, like the Greek world before it, was deeply concerned with ideas of honor and shame. Women were held to different standards than men. Their honor was closely tied to their virginity. So if women participated in these cults, rumors of sexual activity would inevitably arise. Men, on the other hand, were judged according to different standards. They could sleep with men and women, boys and girls, and still retain their honor. And since the cults of the mysteries required total immersion, women could never participate. Some rites might have involved the simulated death and rebirth of the initiate himself. In other words, candidates were prepared to sacrifice everything, including their identity, in the name of their faith. In the cults of Cybele and the Great Mother, initiates shaved their heads and donned distinctive clothing. In the cult of Mithras, they may have gone even further. Some scholars suggest that the final initiation involved a symbolic death and resurrection. The candidate was buried in a tomb and emerged 3 days later as a fully fledged member. Others argued that the focus was less on the candidate's physical body and more on his social identity. Still others believe that the initiate was buried alive for a brief period, just long enough to simulate death. What's clear is that this rite of passage was a central aspect of the cult. For a Roman man, membership in the cult of Mithras was not just a matter of belief. It was a complete transformation of identity. Candidates gave up not only their old beliefs, but also their old names. Instead, they took on a number of symbols, from the title of Miles to the color red, to a ring bearing the figure of Mithras. In fact, one inscription describes the cult as a secret brotherhood adorned with rings, silent and pure. No texts survive from the cult itself. All that remains are carvings, inscriptions, and a few scattered references from outsiders. And yet it flourished. From Britain to Syria, Mithraea had been found beneath cities and forts, always hidden, always similar. We know about it because someone was willing to reveal its secrets, perhaps in order to expose its blasphemies, perhaps in order to warn people away from its dangerous ways. But whatever the motive, the Roman historian Plutarch left us with a description of the cult's practices. According to him, the cult began in Persia and spread from there. Soldiers returning home from campaigns in the East brought with them the stories of strange gods and unfamiliar rituals. Soon, cults like that of Mithras were springing up across the empire. It is said that the cult offered comfort to soldiers far from home, a sense of order and meaning amid the chaos of war. But it wasn't limited to them. Anyone could join, given that they were male. It shared imagery with early Christianity, yet the two faiths were fundamentally different in practice and structure. Early Christians also emphasized salvation, the promise of life after death, but they rejected elaborate rituals and secret doctrines. For them, the mysteries of God were revealed in simplicity and accessible to everyone. By contrast, the cult of Mithras demanded total commitment and complete secrecy. It was a religion of strictures and prohibitions, and that's why it survived so long. because it offered a complete way of life in exchange for absolute obedience. When Christianity became dominant, the cult of Mithras faded. Its chambers were sealed, forgotten beneath layers of dust and centuries. But they are still there, sleeping under modern cities, their silence undisturbed. From the underworld of mystery, we return now to the surface, to a villa in Pompeii, where another kind of life played out in measured, delicate routines. The fresco is known as the Wedding of Cupid and Psyche, and it seems like a typical Roman painting until you notice the servant in the foreground. It's not Roman. Look at his dark skin, his curly hair, his distinctive clothing. He's Egyptian. The fresco dates to the 1st century AD. It was painted sometime before the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD, and it offers us a glimpse of an ancient world rarely seen today, a Roman household in everyday life. This was a wealthy villa. Its gardens were exotic, filled with flowers and plants imported from distant lands. The figures in the painting are all well dressed, but it's hard to say whether they're Roman or Egyptian. Perhaps they're Greek. The point is that the cultural boundaries we draw today did not exist in antiquity. People moved freely between city-states and empires. Gods changed names and took on new attributes. Customs and traditions were constantly being exchanged. And in some cases, those exchanges resulted in entirely new cultural forms. This was the case in Egypt. Over the course of its long history, the country was ruled by Persians, Greeks, and Romans. But instead of imposing their culture on the Egyptians, their rulers incorporated native customs into their own. The result was something uniquely Egyptian, yet at the same time thoroughly Roman. This fusion is evident in the fresco, but it was also evident throughout Egyptian society. The Romans appointed Egyptians to influential positions in the government. They intermarried with the local population. Their children, educated in both cultures, served as interpreters and diplomats between Rome and the rest of the empire. One of these individuals was the philosopher Philo of Alexandria, who lived in the 1st century BC and tried to reconcile Roman culture with that of his ancestors. He wrote treatises on everything from dreams to theodicy. He translated the Torah into Greek. He was assassinated by Jewish rebels, but not before establishing himself as the greatest Alexandrian philosopher of his age. Philo of Alexandria is a good example of the kind of cosmopolitan individual the Romans sought to cultivate in their subject provinces. The Emperor Augustus, for instance, wanted Egypt to be a model province, a showcase for the benefits of Roman rule. And indeed, no province benefited more than Egypt. During the Republic, the country had been neglected. Now, thanks to the efforts of men like Philo of Alexandria, it was firmly integrated into the imperial system. The cosmopolitan ideal was a cornerstone of Roman imperialism, but it was also a key to survival in a diverse and dynamic world. Today, we are visiting Pompeii. It is morning in Pompeii. The air is mild and light filters gently through the open courtyard of a well-appointed domus, private home belonging to a patrician family. A woman stirs from sleep. It's not yet light, enough for her servants to creep softly into the room. She is neither a queen nor a slave, but she lives surrounded by luxury. Her sandals are soft, her garments are dyed in precious colors. Slaves are given instructions, meals are planned, a tutor visits to teach her children. She may receive guests, other women, sometimes men, depending on the occasion. They recline on couches, sip watered wine, and discuss family, jewelry, politics, fashion. A visitor admires a ring of coral or amber. Another examines a brooch set with garnets and pearls. Still another brings news of the latest scandal, gossip from the theater or the forum. One woman brings a length of new silk, its colors brilliant. Another asks where it was bought, who designed it. And when the afternoon grows long, they may rise and stroll together through the atrium or perambulate the colonnaded garden. There the air is thick with the scent of laurel and rosemary. Statues of gods watch from the corners, silent witnesses to their every move. A musician somewhere practices his lyre, its music soft and slow. The women pause before a fountain, the sound of water a constant solace in this hot climate. They live well, but not freely. Her marriage was arranged. Her movements are observed. Her mouth, though painted red, is only for smiling. Her dress, though fine linen, can never be un. It is 79 AD. You are standing in the ruins of Pompeii. You've come to see the skeleton of a city frozen in time. Here the earth opened up and swallowed a way of life whole. But the earth had been rumbling for weeks. Everyone knew that something was wrong. But what did they really know? Could they imagine? Even scholars in far Athens were uncertain. This was an age when temples were built to gods of earthquakes and volcanoes, to heroes of old, and even to deified emperors. People lived with danger as a fact of life. Some would say it was inevitable. Life is not without peril, so why not meet it head-on? Better to die young than old. A year before, a tremor had shaken the coast of Campania. Houses had cracked and fallen. An earthquake. That was the word on everyone's lips. Romans said it was the worst they'd felt in 20 years. Some said it was divine retribution for the corruption of their age. Others that it was just the settling of the earth. When a building collapsed next door, people moved out. Then the tremors began again, daily, nightly, tremors and small shocks. A few fled the city altogether, but most stayed put. If the earth wanted them, it would take them soon enough. So they went about their business. Villagers worked in the fields, shopkeepers displayed their wares, lovers whispered sweet nothings under the colonnades. In taverns, men drank and argued politics while dice rattled and prostitutes gambled. At the gladiator barracks, slaves sparred in the sand. Housewives bartered for fruit, fish, or fresh loaves of bread. Street vendors hawked their wares. The baker mixed his dough. The barber shaved his customers. The blacksmith beat his metal. The fishmonger cleaned and displayed his catch. Children skipped rope. Soldiers drilled. Nobles drove their chariots. Lovers stole kisses. Priests prayed. Gladiators trained. Philosophers lectured. Old men dozed. Beggars panhandled. People lived and breathed and walked among the tremors. Oh, they laughed and sang and made love and fought. The mountain did not care. It rumbled, but it did not speak. Not yet. Women in Roman society occupied a narrow sphere. They managed the household. Their role was to oversee the running of the house, to care for the children, to entertain guests, to maintain social order. It was a full-time job. Roman women did not work outside the home as priestesses or priests, healers or politicians, teachers or gladiators. Those jobs were reserved for men. But inside the house, women had many duties. First, and most important, was the management of the household budget. How much grain to buy, how many slaves to hire, whether to invest in property or lend money at interest. All these decisions fell to the female head of the house. It was her responsibility to keep the family solvent, to make sure there was food in the larder, oil for the lamps, wine for special occasions, and new clothes for festivals. She also had to make sure the house was kept up. Servants must be instructed. Slaves were given instructions. Meals were planned. Tutor visited to teach her children. She might receive guests, other women, sometimes men, depending on the occasion. They reclined on couches, sipping watered wine, discussing jewelry, gardens, children, politics, fashion. One woman brought news of a party the night before, how handsome Marcus Aurelius looked in his new purple robe. Another admired a friend's golden hair ribbon, asking where it was bought. And yet another questioned the quality of wool arriving from the flocks in the south. Some days a barber visited to trim their nails and eyebrows, removing unwanted hairs with tweezers. Other days men came calling not to visit the women, but to be visited. These were merchants or contractors or tax collectors. They conducted their business from the comfort of reclining couches. The women were present, but they didn't participate. They listened while the men discussed prices and profits, investments and expenses, sales and taxes. Sometimes the women spoke up, asking questions or offering opinions, but ultimately the men made the decisions. When her husband came home, he would relax on his cushioned couch, read his scroll, drink his wine and talk about the affairs of state or the provinces or his villa in the country. He too had responsibilities, providing for the family's security, managing their larger estates, ensuring their prosperity, entertaining guests, and maintaining their reputation. But he could not manage the house itself. That was her domain. They lived side by side, man and wife, in the same house, but they did not always live together. When her husband traveled, she was in charge. When he died, she inherited his estate. She was his closest living relative. She managed everything. She hired and fired servants, oversaw building projects, decided how much to spend on food or wine, whether to mend a roof or redecorate a room. Through her, the house breathed and functioned. Without her, it would collapse into chaos. And then, one day, the mountain speaks. Vesuvius erupts, falls like snow. For days, it blankets the city. We don't know exactly what happened next. We know that people huddled in the atrium, triclinium, or cubiculum, hiding from falling pumice, desperately waiting for daylight. Maybe some fled across the fields, some climbed the nearby hills, others ran for the hills, but most died where they stood. Today, her house is a museum. Her footprints frozen in ash, her sandals beside her as if she just stepped out for a walk and never came back. Her jewelry recovered, polished, and displayed on velvet cushions. Her perfume bottles still filled with the scent of eternity. Her frescoes intact, her furniture undisturbed, her world once alive with subtle rhythms now preserved in silence. Tonight, allow yourself to drift gently backward through the centuries, to a time when the Roman Empire stretched across continents. Its power both immense and deeply personal. Though often remembered for its grand architecture and military triumphs, Rome was, in many ways, a place of contradictions. Beneath the marble columns and orderly roads lay a world of odors, noise, ritual, and quiet endurance. In this calm exploration, we will peel back the smooth facade of empire and sink slowly into the humbler layers of Roman life. Together, we will visit the most mundane yet revealing corners of daily survival. We will examine the life of an emperor whose whims bewildered even his loyal court. We will uncover the secret rites practiced by candlelight beneath city streets. We will end our journey in a quiet garden in Pompeii, observing the routines of a woman whose days were shaped by luxury, but not always liberty. So close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let yourself fall into the rhythm of ancient life.